Hello, one and all, and welcome to the pilot episode of Interstellar Radio, a podcast focused on the NACL, partnered with Supernova. Hosting Interstellar Radio is myself, Random Minion Caster, or RMC, and alongside me, Gordo. And since it's our first episode, Gordo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, RMC. I am a caster in the North American amateur space. I covered the Aegis Champions League over this last year and hopefully into this coming year where we just had our biggest split ever. We were one of the largest non-Riot sponsored events that we've had probably since the franchising era, although don't quote me on that. Do Risen Champs as well, do some OQs when I get the opportunity. Stuff like that. So I've been active around here, and then I host a separate NACL podcast, the Salt Mine. So if you can't get enough of this one, go check that one out as well, and hear all the stuff we have to say over there as well.
Excellent. Lots of experience. We will need it for sure. And right in case you didn't hear, Aegis is looking for that sponsorship. And our first guest for this first preseason episode is none other than the illustrious Kelsey Moser. If you haven't heard of her, I don't know what you're doing. Well, you're going to learn tonight. And so now, Kelsey, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. But just to add some spice to things, I'd like you to introduce yourself with two truths and one lie. And after you give your introduction, Gordo and I will see how well we know you, or perhaps how well we don't know you. So, without further ado, Kelsey, please introduce yourself.
Great. So I normally hate two truths and a lie because I always feel like it's just people humble bragging. But seeing as I'm currently unemployed and learning how to market myself better,
I heard
why not? Why not? So my two truths and a lie are one, I was part of the roster building team for two LCS championship winning rosters. Two, I was the first woman on stage in both EU LCS and LCS. Three, I have won an Emmy for production work.
Okay, so two LCS winning rosters. First woman on stage in LCS or LEC, and the last one was an Emmy winning work.
I am skeptical on number two because I think Remelia might predate Kelsey being on stage in LCS.
Kelsey didn't come to NA till 2018. Or
Have we gotten it? Did we do it?
So I initially worded it as coach in my notes, but either way it's wrong because in EU LCS, there was a woman on stage as a coach for Origin technically. She was technically not a coach. She was their manager, but she was on stage in the coach role for playoffs when they implemented the coach rule. So technically it is not correct in either region. I am considered the first woman on stage coach in both regions, but technically I am not. So yes.
Hey,
there we go. I'm gonna take that. I'll take the full credit. Even if my reasoning for being correct is not the intended one.
It was correct anyway because I didn't word it as coach. So yeah. And I love giving props to Remelia. So happy to bring her up. Happy to mention her. She was absolutely the first woman on stage as a player or coach in LCS.
So. Of course, and you know what? The two rosters you won with, of course, 100 Thieves, as well as EG more recently, and the Emmy-winning production. Which one would that be?
Is that for NACL?
No, it was for Worlds. Worlds. Yeah, Worlds 2022 finals won the Emmy for sports broadcast, best esports broadcast of the year, and I do have a credit for that. So,
wow,
let's go! Congrats there. Those are some great humble brags. I'm gonna be honest. You made some great choices.
I mean, they're not even humble, They're just, it's just straight bragging. But yeah, usually when I do two truths and a lie, I do really, really awkward ones like inbreeding in my family, etc. However you want to go. So good times.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, you know what? The point of this is brag away, because the more impressive you are, the better it is for us. The better it is for the show. And you know what? It's legit. It's humble because Kelsey has a lot more achievements. But today, we're here to talk about NACL. So we're going to move into that. And of course, NACL hasn't started yet, but there's already been a lot of changes. We've got changes to the formatting and scheduling, I think, is the first thing that we should get into. So Gordo, I know you've got experience. You've already recorded another podcast, so why don't you lead us into this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fresh off. I am the day after recording my other podcast here, so I've been hammering NACL for a couple of days here. So we've got some big format changes here. It feels like it got leaked forever ago, but it is technically new news. Pretty recently, as of recording, we are moving over to the Fearless Draft format. So for those who are not as familiar, that is going to be a format where over the course of a best of series, you cannot lock in the same champion for the same team more than once. You can see the same champion on opposite teams, but each team only gets one crack at it per champ. There's also some scheduling changes. It is going to be going to best of 3 to enable that fearless format. And it is also going to be a single round robin between all 10 teams in the NACL. And that brings with it some scheduling and some broadcast approach changes. They are now going to be only one stream rather than the 2 synchronized streams that we saw last year, and they are going to be immediately following LCS. The LCS stream going to go right into NACL, which should hopefully bring in a whole bunch of new folks' eyes towards the NACL. And yeah, I think that covers all of them. If I forgot one, please let me know, guys. But that should be about everything, and that alone is a huge amount of stuff to talk about.
For sure. Let's start with the fearless draft because I think that's what a lot of people are interested in. And Kelsey, I know that of course you still follow along a little bit with the LPL. I believe the LDL is the only league that was implementing it
Yes.
prior to this. So I'm curious, do you have any insight into sort of how the fearless draft is working, and is it a good format for us to be shifting towards?
I think for me, the fearless draft change is almost purely a viewership based decision, in my opinion. I think it is, people try to make arguments for it being good for the competitive development of players, but I think it is not. It is just way better for viewership. And that is just the way it is. I think it's not bad to make a choice to go for viewership specifically because right now that is the name of the game in North America, and just ignoring the fact that that is what people are looking for, just increasing viewership, is dishonest. So from that perspective, I think it is a good change. It will encourage people to at least watch at the start to kind of see what this fearless draft is about. So the more marketing and the more information that gets out, the better it is for the league. In terms of player development, I generally think something like Fearless should be implemented actually at the higher level first before the development level, because I think the way League works is you generally learn the game through the lens of one champion at any specific time. And then once you get to that level, that's when you start expanding more champs. And when you're entering the pro scene for the first time or the semi-pro scene for the first time, you probably don't have as big of a champion pool, and it's fine. You should be learning how to play as a team. You should be learning all of those elements that a first-time team player has to learn before specifically focusing on expanding champ pool. So from a coaching perspective, I don't think Fearless Draft is great for NACL. I think it's great for LCS. I think it's fantastic for LCS, and it should be implemented in LCS, but they're never going to take a risk like that in LCS before NACL. So NACL is a great way to test that, and it should be great for viewership as well. So,
okay, well, that's interesting because I actually saw it differently, and maybe I'm the one with the hot take here, or a lukewarm take, because I actually like the idea of it in a developmental league. Because I understand
terrible in a developmental league because you're not even playing the
Slam 'em,
champions
Kelsey.
properly. You're just not even, like, the thing is that people in NACL, it's like, oh, they play so many champions, but they're not even playing them at a high level, right? They're playing champions to play the champions, and it kind of cheeses or kind of takes someone by surprise. But like you get there, and then the core champ pool that they're able to reproduce at the LCS level is much smaller, right? So they're locking in the champions. They're technically playing the champions, but they're not like truly. And I feel like that's kind of what Fearless encourages, is just like you play more champions than you're really, really comfortable with, then you're really going to get to an LCS level with, and you're just constantly spamming more champs in scrims compared to just becoming really comfortable and really high level on a good selection of champs that will get you to LCS. So that's for me kind of the difference. Whereas like you're not even getting an experience that will prepare you for the LCS stage, which should be the goal at a developmental level. But it is great for viewership, and at LCS, that's when you should be playing a large variety of champs. So yeah,
So what I'm hearing is you're encouraging one tricks, Kelsey.
I mean, yeah, why not? Like
Okay.
if your goal is to learn the game, you should be focusing on learning one aspect of the game at a time. So whether that's team play, whether that's improving your laning fundamentals, whether that's improving how you're visualizing fights, whatever, you should be focusing on these core fundamental topics. Once you're really, really a master of these core fundamental topics, you're an LCS player, right? And then you begin expanding your champ pool. That is my opinion. So yeah.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, like I said, I was thinking more kind of the opposite side, which
Mhm.
understandably, like
I want to still hear
like
your
I
argument,
mentioned,
RMC though.
yeah, because I was thinking what I'm concerned about, and part of my background's coming from casting CBLOL, where they're
Mhm.
notorious for one tricks in the Brazilian environment, and a lot of them they make it to the competitive stage and it doesn't work because all it takes to remove a one trick is one ban. So having a wider champ pool than say one or two champions, I do think is something that is needful to be developed. It's not an issue I don't think in NA right now. So honestly, I actually don't think Fearless changes too much. I like the best of three change. That's what I like about it. But I don't think a Fearless draft and a best of three is really going to push most of these players' champion pools. So I'm with Kelsey that I think it's good for viewership more than anything else. I don't think it should impact any of these players that I'm seeing on the NACL roster so far.
So I will say I agree it's for viewership, right? I don't think that's a secret. I think most folks who follow pretty closely can kind of make some assumptions as to where it's getting pushed in that regard. I do think that it may be the future. Like I think whether we kind of like it or not, I think the fan reaction has been pretty positive. I've heard it wasn't a full disaster in LDL, although I've heard some of those best of fives got a little messy towards the end. Admittedly, I've not watched, so I'm hearing that all second and third hand. But if it, I think if it's popular and if fans continue to like it, I think it may eventually make its way to the major leagues. At which point, better to start getting used to it now. Um, I have some issues with it from like a drafting philosophy perspective, like what the draft is supposed to be. I don't really like that. If you imagine a team coming in with like their bands prepared, what they think is most important to deny the other team, and the other team brings out something surprising that they weren't ready for. In the current world, you have to adapt to that, and that means you have to sacrifice bands that you've previously committed for. In Fearless, you don't have to do that anymore. In Fearless, you just get to go, "Ooh, thank God that's gone," and then just stick with the exact same thing, game in and game out. The other thing is, I talked with Olorum on my other show about this not
Mhm.
too long ago, and something he said that really stuck with me is he's thinking towards the end of like a long best of five, Fearless may become more about being able to assemble a team comp that even works more so than it is about the other things that really go into a draft. So thinking about that, right? Like a team just trying to assemble whatever they can in a world where they have now 25 bands against them late into a best of five. And like at that point, I can definitely see how it would feel like a team is almost playing against the format more than they're playing against their opponents, at least in the drafting phase. Like just trying to find a way to assemble something given what they've the situation that they're forced into. And I think that's a little unfortunate, especially at like as the pressure mounts up and as you're getting the most exciting part of the series. Now the teams are interacting less in the draft phase, so that would be a little disappointing to me if it ends up working out that way. But I do also think the obvious upsides are obvious, right? That's why we're not really discussing them, right? Like obviously you're going to see more different champions. Like, I don't think that's controversial or unexpected in any way. So there are upsides too. I don't want to just spend the whole time poo pooing the idea of Fearless. I think it'll be fun at the very least.
I also think it's like combining that with the live patch kind of change. It's again, you're in a situation where, okay, we didn't prepare for a champion that was buffed here. Okay, again, just one game and it's gone. You don't really have to, right?
Yeah.
Prepare for the champ in that way, right? In a best of 3 series. But I also think, as a coach in North America, I can comfortably say we don't really care what the other team picks anyway. We just draft in a vacuum. That's why red side drafts look like blue side drafts. It's fine, It doesn't really matter appreciably.
I do. I will also say, like, fearless gives you the fearless at least gives you the aspiration of having like this huge mega mind coach who can or team who can go for like crazy off the wall stuff. Like, you get into a position where it's like, oh, the other team's picked Kennen and Rumble this series, and it's like, oh, now we can ban Gwen, Vladimir, and I don't know, name your AP top laner. Now Malphite is Thanos. Like, that kind of stuff, it would be really exciting. I just don't think it's going to work out that way, though. From all I understand about how drafts normally go and in comp, I feel like it's going to be infrequent at best.
If anything, it's starting to sound more and more like this is good for NACL, not for the players, but for the coaches, to actually teach them not to draft in a vacuum, to actually expand their ability to draft a little bit.
Kind of. I mean, it's really, especially at NACL, like when you're starting to restrict champions, it's gonna just be way more about, like, kind of to a Lauren's point, like, what are my players comfortable with now? Like, what's left that my players are comfortable with? And that's how most good drafters in NACL think anyway, is kind of ultra comfort wins in like tier 2 and tier 3 more than anything else. I would say it also wins a lot in tier 1. More than meta, more than like kind of the perfect counter pick. A lot of times ultra comfort is just going to win the game. So I think that's kind of what's going to evolve more and more, is just what are we really comfortable with? What does this look like? Game 3 drafts might look a little weird in the game 5, but I think over time, like, those concerns kind of go away as we just sort of adapt to whatever the draft meta is, and we'll see how it goes. Yeah. We'll also see more pocket picks, right? To your point, like, you think it's bad for one tricks. I think it's actually really good for one tricks, because you'll get like the Rengar players who say, no, the champ shit, or like the Riven players who say, oh no, I'm not picking that champ, right? It's terrible in the meta, but it's like you get to a point where we can't play anything else. The counters are all gone or banned. Oh, this suddenly looks good for Riven, right? This suddenly looks good for whatever. So I think it's actually more one-trick friendly than it is like prohibitive of one-tricks kind of expressing themselves. I especially bring up the Riven players, because you talk to any Riven player and they say their champ is terrible. So
the Riven and the Katarina mains, they can't. it's all that's on my Twitter feed.
So it's one of those things, yeah.
This is why we need Fearless and LCS, so Sniper can pull out his Riven top lane. That's what I'm hearing. Well,
do you want to talk about scheduling at all? Yeah. That was the other thing about format changes, is that we now have LCS feed directly into NACL. I think that part's great, right? I think it's good to let people just feed directly in from the main league. I think especially now that there's only 4 games a day, like, when I'm planning my watch party for LCS opening day, it's great that, we don't just sit there and watch 4 best of 1s and then it's over. It's cool that we're going to be able to, feed right into a couple of BO3s and keep watching League of Legends for the whole day. Especially now that it's back on the weekends. I think that's going to be great. And I like that, as someone now doing 2 NACL podcasts, I love that there aren't 30 games a week anymore. That's going to be really good, because that's a lot of games to watch when balancing everything else. So that's going to be super cool too.
Wait, can we just cast and math this quickly? How many games a week is there going to be with best of
15 max.
15 max?
Or actually, it's like 4 series most weeks from what I've heard. So maybe it's 12 max.
12 max from an ACL. Okay, yeah, and then the 4 or 8 from LCS. So.
Is it 4 or 5? Because I heard that one day might be 3 series. I think it's probably just 2 series a day though. But
I think we are. I think we are probably just. I don't even think it's out officially. So I think we're just reporting on different leaks that we've all heard respectively.
Yeah. Either way, though, it's.
We can discuss this first, and if the numbers come out before then, we keep this.
Yeah, I mean, if we have to cut it, we have to cut it. But looking at my leak, it's 4 games a week, at least from what I've seen.
I think 4 games a week 4 games a day 4 series.
Four series per week.
Okay,
So it's
okay,
two
okay.
series after LCS.
There we
each
go.
day.
Have
My
that only for
my
the first 2
brain
weeks, according to my
clock
links.
had to catch up on that. But
True, and then we start
Every
doing
other week after
Fridays and
that,
weird
there's
stuff.
6, and then there's I think a
so
power week in week 4.
yeah, because I mean, there's 6 weeks of LCS, right? And there's definitely, if you do the math, there's definitely going to be some super weeks in there.
Yep.
For sure, the interesting thing for me is that we had the single round robin kind of academy schedule in 2021, if you all remember, and everyone hated that. So this will be very interesting. Because I'm one of the few coaches who is a big proponent of it, because I think, again, for development, it's better to have more scrims. And if you feel like you need stage games to improve, your coaching is probably bad. So I think that more scrims, more practice is probably better for you. And just always those periods where you would have like break weeks and you could focus on specific goals as opposed to just coaching to the matches was always like the most rewarding time to scrim, in my opinion. So I think fewer matches is actually better for tier 2 leagues, but it also makes the matches more exciting when they happen, and you don't really get viewership fatigue, which is a big concern in BO3, I think.
True.
But so we'll see. I think it's good for viewership and good for the teams, but I'm sure people will complain because they will want more quote unquote stage experience. They always do.
Sure. Yeah,
So,
and I think in the
yeah.
past, one of the complaints people had against best of threes was also just sponsorships and stuff, and being able to retain viewers, pardon me, through that
Yeah.
period. So I'm curious how that affects Riot end of things. Granted, I don't think NACL is a moneymaker or a big moneymaker for Riot anyways. You're just trying to break even is for development. So hopefully that doesn't factor into things. The other thing as well is timing, because I've heard a couple of players complain about timing now.
It's late at night, yeah.
Well, yeah, the Eastern time zone,
Mhm.
1 a.m. games.
Yeah,
I mean,
because we're starting at 3 p.m. Eastern for LCS, 4 games. So assuming the shorter schedule that Mark C has put in, we should be finishing by 7 p.m. Eastern.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're doing 2 best of 3s. That's potentially 6 games. If you start at 7, you're finishing at 1 a.m. And that's on the shorter weeks.
Well, that's your starting game 3 at 1 a.m., right?
Yeah. So, or is it starting or ending? Yeah. Either way, it's rough for some of these players. You know what? Actually, while we're here and talking about schedules, can we just sidetrack a little bit? Because I know that today announcements were made about, or not, was it today? OQ schedule information came out.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about it today, at least.
Yeah. So shall we
It
dip
was
a little bit into
not
this
today,
as
but
well?
it was yesterday, I think.
Yesterday.
We can talk about
Yeah.
OQs, yeah.
Yesterday
Yeah,
was the
because-
announcement. Today was the was a lot of the discourse, we could say, for those who are hanging around the OQ Discord and stuff.
Oh, actually, I shouldn't say today because this comes out like next week.
This is recorded January 10th. Every reference to today, yesterday, tomorrow needs to be understood from that lens.
It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So the scheduling for OQs has been questionable because it's also at the weekends. It's the live games will be played at the same time, I believe, as the LCS games, but they won't be aired till during the week. And Kelsey, I know you said that weekdays are terrible. So why don't we dip a little bit into why weekdays are terrible and why the OQ match timing, the schedule for OQs, is also coming under so much fire.
Weekdays are terrible for NACL or OQ teams because the budgets are so low and you cannot afford for those players to be full-time players unless they are just mommy and daddy is paying for them to play League of Legends. That's literally the situation where it's like if OQs are being played during the day on weekdays, then that's what will happen. You could do evenings. Evenings works, but again, if you're doing it too late, you have to accommodate both time zones. And the fact that there's like a 3-hour separation of time zones in North America is unfortunate because then you have to accommodate people who will be starting later because they're on West Coast, and then people who will have to go to bed earlier because they're on East Coast. And that's a little bit easier to do, but it's still like not the greatest for weekdays when you're asking people to play 20 hours a week and then matches for basically like $0 to $100 a month in OQs. Let's be realistic here. So it's just Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Like $100 a month is like bank, right? That's the good shit if you get it at all. So that's why weekdays for dev leagues are terrible. So anyone who suggests like we should just play on weekdays is probably not considering the full picture. And then NACL now as well is you can't really do it full time anymore either. So that's for me the biggest thing to point out, and why everything's kind of being crammed into weekends, and LCS coming back to weekends is ultimately going to cause a lot more congestion. I do think the best solution is just stream the games anyway. Like OQs are not going to detract from LCS viewership.
Mhm.
Realistically speaking, people who would watch LCS, who would watch OQs instead of LCS, there's not a lot, but there's also not going to be a huge drop in OQ viewership. Like just percentage wise, maybe yes, but a drop in OQ viewership that is significant from just a pure numbers point. OQs don't get a lot of viewers, unfortunately. So it's just one of those things. Stream them anyway. Try to maybe do more on the YouTube end for people who don't catch it live. But the people who will be involved in the OQ scene, either as casters, producers, players, are doing it as a passion project for the most part. So that's one of those things where, unfortunately, this is the monetary situation, and you may as well just not care about the overlap for the people who want to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's fair. And just to
Yeah.
add into the weekday discussion as well, I remember when Sniper was playing OQs, he was in high school.
Yeah.
So staying up to like 1 a.m. is not okay when he has to go to school tomorrow. It's not like he can arrange his courses or,
Yeah.
it's not like university or work
Yep.
where you can just
And
play
he's
games.
not the only one, right? Like I know, NA talent's a meme, but there's the or lack of NA talent is a meme, but there's like there's young guys who are going to be playing in OQs. There's guys in high school that are going to be playing in OQs. I mean, that was Toasty pretty recently.
Sure,
Like I
yeah.
know I know Cryogen is an upcoming
Yep.
support who's like
Support.
16. I remember seeing him in ACL. I'm sure there's others too that just don't have their ages listed on the wiki, and not every player I cast DMs me to tell me their age. But there's guys that are in high
Yeah,
school that are playing in these
is
events.
Cryo is in high school for OQs. There's a lot of them. I think the biggest thing for me is just remembering the context of that when we're talking about scheduling, because for whatever reason, I feel like that gets left out of a lot of conversations. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I completely agree. I've been pretty open about on various socials talking about OQ scheduling. Yeah, I and you already said this, Kelsey, but yeah, I have no idea where this perception that like we can never overlap in streams is coming from. Like I know it's coming from on high, and I know it is like a big goal of riots and stuff, but yeah, I think the conflict there is pretty fictional. Like I don't think it's gonna detract from LCS in any way. Um yeah, I mean, it's like last year we had 2 simultaneous NACL streams and an OQ stream all occurring
Yeah.
at the same time, overlapping with one another, and I don't think anybody ever complained about it. Like I've never heard about any detractors talking about some big loss on one front or another because of that. And yet now it's like 3 months later, and it's unthinkable to we're going to sacrifice the live stream of the OQs entirely in pursuit of avoiding that same situation. It's very strange to me.
If
It's
anything, the complaint was we needed one more stream. We're missing the trifecta of LCS on the weekends at the same time, and people were asking for that. So I agree with you. I think Colomer as well. I can't remember if it's on Twitter where he was saying that he doesn't see it either. It's like kind of made up, or he feels like it's just a policy sort of thing where
Agree.
somebody somewhere up the line just decided, like, hey, this is policy, and we're just going to run with it. And I can see where it's coming from a corporate point of view. But I'm going to be honest. OQs, they're not going to survive in a corporate like sort of situation.
it has to be the LCS product driven, right? It has to be like LCS product concerns. But if we're concerned about like the maybe 100 viewers who will watch OQs instead of LCS,
Well,
then we have a lot more problems, right? So
or
it's
just I mean, or schedule OQs later and overlap with NACL like you
yeah.
did last split.
Yeah.
Because I mean, these if these guys succeed in OQs, they're going to have to play at NACL times anyway.
Mhm.
So
Well, I do think that would actually be a bigger cannibalization of the viewership than
maybe.
LCS and OQs,
Sure.
honestly. But yeah, you know what? The NACL people aren't screaming about it. So you know what? If LCS people aren't happy about it, I'm sure NACL doesn't mind giving up some of their viewership or sharing some of that viewership with the OQs.
I think a lot more can be done in terms of packaging products for VOD viewership, if that's a direction that we're going anyway. And so a lot more has to be done discussing like how we're going to do that or what's going to happen in terms of how the product is looking. So there's been a lot of backlash. Whenever there's backlash, usually Riot decides to change their minds, but we'll see what happens. So
Yeah, so you mentioned VOD, packaging the VOD nicely, Kelsey.
Yeah.
Do VODs generate any money for, like, is there any advantage to doing nice VODs realistically? Is it just for
I mean,
people who want that?
does the live broadcast generate money? And this is the biggest
No, no,
thing. Like, this is the biggest thing though, because we do get you do get certain sponsors for the NACL broadcast itself, right? But there's very little, or the OQ broadcast itself, but there's very little space for team sponsors. So there's absolutely no incentive for brands to sponsor teams anyway. So there's no revenue generation really for teams outside of just rev share, whatever that is.
Mhm.
And then of course, like we're talking about, does the live stream generate money versus do VODs generate money? There's the YouTube algorithm is objectively just way better than the Twitch algorithm for discoverability, for viewership, etc. So there can be a concerted effort put into making VODs more monetizable, especially for a product that doesn't generate a ridiculous amount of live viewership, like the OQs or the NACL. There can be, you can actually probably generate more viewership, more monetization via like YouTube discoverability algorithms than for like a Twitch stream of an OQ product. So that's for sure. I think that's something like when we're asking, okay, do VODs make money? The answer is yes, probably they would make more money
I do
than
think
a live stream. So
yeah,
yeah.
I would think
Okay.
there's definitely got to be like effort put into like search engine optimizing them, or promoting them, or doing something. Just because I know I watched a lot of NACL VODs last year. There were two simultaneous streams, so I had no choice.
Yep.
And some of them happened while I was working. ACL doesn't pay the bills, guys. I have a job as well. And, yeah. And a lot of them were like 100 viewers, like they're 100 views. There are not a lot of people watching the NACL VODs. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there doesn't need to be, right? If they're nothing else, they're a resource, right? People need to be able to go in and watch footage of players when they get recruited. Coaches need to be able to go in and find footage of these players when they're doing scouting. And it's like it's just part of having a cohesive scene, right? Is like the ability to access footage of the gameplay at all its levels. So I mean, I think it's definitely important. But I think also like having a way to watch the games without having known the results beforehand is also super important. So keep that in mind when doing OQ. We'll talk about how we're going to handle OQs this year.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about like money, right? Because I think that is one of the biggest issues that that League as an esport experiences, not just in the tier 2, tier 3 level, but heck, esports winters upon League of Legends for a reason. Like even the major regions we're seeing cutbacks happen. LPL, we heard about that one. I think I know that CB LOL, they are broadcast as well. Some of their casters aren't coming back. I think they're scaling down some of their other products as well. So yeah, that's always an issue. And I feel like Kelsey mentioned, if YouTube or VODs is a income stream, we need to kind of reach out to that, because I know that, Kelsey, you were, I think, in charge of the NACL back in 2022, right?
Yeah.
And a large part of what you were trying to do was trying to generate interest, increase the sponsorship and share and stuff like that in there. I know Emily this year as well has been doing a lot to do that. I think Emily was the one who got the emotes for the Twitch channel to drive subscriptions.
Yeah.
So we're all trying to do this, right? So it just feels weird that we're not seeking every avenue. And heck, I don't know if there are other ways to increase sponsorship. I know, Kelsey, you mentioned like teams, their sponsors don't get any screen time.
Yeah, they don't get any screen time.
Yeah,
and that's
weird.
And that's a big thing for me, and this is something that I've brought up a lot, is there has to be like time on the broadcast for team specific sponsor shout outs or any piece of sponsored content, even if they don't exist right now, right? Like there has to be a space for it, otherwise it will never exist. Because I mean, LCS worst case, it's on the jersey. We don't get the you don't really get the jersey or the player cams, right, in the NACL or the OQs. The other big thing is just kind of there's a big focus in terms of the LCS and for having the YouTube channel be devoted towards like pre-produced, like really nicely done content pieces, right? So the VOD channel is almost just kind of, oh, this is for if you missed it, right? This is for if you missed the live stream. And almost all the emphasis is on the live product. So the question is, does this generate money? It's like, if it doesn't, it's probably because there's almost no effort put into the packaged VODs at all. And you have to start to wonder, like on a per product basis, especially if we're having a lot of overlapping broadcasts, at what point does it become worth to sort of invest a little bit more time into making better VODs? And having a specific channel also dedicated towards these secondary leagues or third leagues, like if Riot is going to operate them, then they should allow a YouTube channel to be made for content related to those products, right? There's so many content pieces that are probably just gone to the void that have been made by NACL producers and content creators because there isn't, like, they were never kind of allowed a YouTube channel to host the content. So it just kind of had to be archived right internally or in a Dropbox or wherever, right? So that's a problem as well.
Well, rest in peace, Risen Hot Dog, if you know.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, Kelsey, you remember that one?
We're not resting in peace on that one.
No, that one rested in peace.
Okay. We'll continue.
Well, I guess that's what the OQ experiment is, this split, right? Like they are going to rebroadcast it, so it is going to be VOD content, and I guess we'll see what they can do. Then the question is, like, do y'all have any ideas of how else, like, they could increase monetary gain? I mean, like Kelsey, obviously you mentioned having like team sponsor segments or things like that. Like I think the last year's NACL broadcast did a great job with driving subscriptions with the emotes and trying to interact more with people, bits and donations and stuff like that. But I'm gonna be honest, like I really don't know where else you go besides sponsorship for a lot of these sort of leagues and these sort of VODs. Is there any other revenue streams we can actually even really be looking at, or do owners are owners just gonna have to pony up and say, like, if I want in on this, I know I'm gonna be making a loss?
I mean, even for LCS teams, like 70% of money that gets made, like you can call it revenue or whatever, it's just the gross revenue effectively is sponsorship revenue. That's just the way the space operates, and that's why it is so problematic, right? That's why there is such a big problem. As soon as sponsors aren't seeing returns because you're effectively just paying for the league to exist and not getting revenue returns because monetization is imperfect, that's when everyone pulls out. They see other sponsors are pulling out, and then you see such a big hit across the board. And unfortunately, you look at your balance sheet, and even if like OQs and an ACL aren't a significant part of revenue, they're aren't a significant part of expense, they're also not generating revenue. So those get cut first, and that's more or less the way it's going to work. Yes, the current business model is appeal to sponsors more. That's the way it is. Appeal to ads more. But I think that there's a lot of other ways that making money can be explored. Everyone kind of puts down merchandising, but if you listen to the people who are putting down merchandising, those are the people who have partnerships positions and make money off of the fact that the league exists off of selling ads and sponsorships. So I think that there have to be a lot more creative ways to do things. I think the Disguise, Patreon, like those types of subscription models are more and more what every content stream, everything is looking into. That's a lot more sustainable over time because it is basically just fans paying directly for content they enjoy. So I think that that's kind of like where you kind of have to look, especially for more of these grassroots or lower budget operations like OQs or NACL.
Yeah,
so basically sponsorship from the masses. Gordo, we need to start making a Patreon account for this.
We do. I've been saying recently, man, I gotta get a Patreon in my life. I gotta get
I recommend
$4,000
coffee.
a month in passive income going. So let's let's get that rolling as soon as we can.
Yeah, I recommend Coffee, KOFI.
Oh yes.
They take a smaller percentage than Patreon, so there you go. Shout out.
Okay. Yeah.
All
Actually,
right.
that's where I got my YouTube model made. Was
Let's
from,
get in
our-
there.
Let's go.
I know we're already like way over time on this topic. The only other thing I would say on the monetization subject, which is I guess a unique
Yeah.
topic, right?
Mhm.
So is I do also think like I don't know how accessible it is. I guess it will depend on if things continue to get worse, right, and or and even if they don't, right, will the teams kind of will there be an ultimatum with Riot where at some point in-game monetization can be in some way more directly tied with esports, or does it even need to be more directly tied with esports in order to share that money with the teams, right? Because League of Legends is one of the most profitable games in the world. I would say largely because of esports. I don't think they would have the marketing success and the market cap that they have if not for esports. It's very hard to quantify that, but either screw it, we're gonna pretend it's responsible for 10%, 20%, make up a number, or find a way to tie more directly, right? Let people buy skins directly from the stream somehow, stuff like that,
Yeah.
to where that money can then be shared with the teams. Now, of course, that's a Pandora's box that the devs certainly won't want to open, right?
Yeah.
They don't need to, so why would they? But I think that's something to consider, right? Is that Riot makes a lot of money off esports that isn't directly earmarked esports. It's not ticket sales, it's not merch sales, it's not an esports icon, but it's a purchase that would not have been made if esports didn't exist. And tying that back and getting that revenue into the hands of teams and players, I think is something that needs to be considered in the future as well.
For esports directly though, maybe Kelsey can speak to this, but I had
Yeah.
heard in the past that Riot's esports isn't actually net positive in terms of the money they make directly off their esports events. In fact,
Yeah,
they run
but again,
events
that's
on
stuff
that.
that's earmarked esports, right? That's stuff
Right.
that this is esports content, this is an esports ticket, this is a esports skin, whatever. I don't even know if esports skins count towards that. It might be just ticket
Well,
sales, merch
that's
sales,
what I'm
stuff like
wondering.
that.
If those
Yeah.
skins that, like, say, the world skins, the profits or proceeds from that are actually being used to subsidize those worlds or those international events as well, because I can't imagine it's cheap renting out those massive stadiums, setting up everything, hiring Emmy-winning producers like Kelsey Moser, and getting her to do these things. It all costs money, right? So I'm assuming that well, and I could be completely wrong, but I'm assuming a lot of that, the funds they make from the game itself, are kind of going towards these sort of things and paying back their esports.
So this is the very difficult conversation to have, because it is one of those things where you can spin the argument either way, right? You can spin the argument that esports is just a drain on funds and doesn't do anything, or you can spin the argument that esports does generate revenue. And I think that that's one of the things that most likely is an internal conversation at Riot that happens, and is probably an ongoing conversation. I think part of it is because there are very few campaigns like the World Skins where you can create a direct contribution, a direct indication that money is being made in game off of the esports model that exists. And I always wondered, like, one of my favorite things that I saw that was esports related was, and this costs nothing basically on Riot side. They don't have to develop special products for it. They don't have to do anything. They put, I think it was season 3 or season 4, one of those worlds where they would say the most picked champions or the most banned champs. They would put the skins and the champions on sale at the end of every day during the World Championship. And they did this only 1 year and never did it again. So I'd be very curious to see promotions like that. And I just assume it's an unwillingness to kind of collaborate from different internal departments on Riot that don't allow more campaigns like that to occur, at least as experiments, right? So I would love to see more stuff like that, and it would be great if we could see that. But I don't know why it never happened again, so I'm not holding my breath. It's one of those.
Fair enough. Yeah,
Mm.
I really wish it would. But we should move on because we were here to talk about NACL. And the most
Yeah.
exciting thing about every preseason, of course, is taking a look at the new rosters. So let's take a look at those new rosters. 10 teams, and all of them pretty much. Actually, no, Lit didn't make a change, but I think every other team had changes throughout the roster. And they're not in any particular order. I should state that right now. They're not even alphabetical. They're just completely randomized for some odd reason. But we roll with it.
I'm down to hear what rosters are you guys most excited about, and what rosters do you think you're kind of wondering what happened? That would be what I would like to hear. So
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
You know what? I will start first because I am the least knowledgeable right now out of all of us tonight. So for those of you who don't know, I've been away from amateurs for most of 2023 summer while I focused on CB LOL. So a lot of my knowledge might be a little bit outdated. But first of all, the one that caught my eye was the one that's not confirmed. Maryville.
Oh,
We
sure.
have news that they are doing tryouts this week, and I don't know by the time this recording comes out whether or not they'll have finished their tryouts. But for those of you who don't know, Maryville University, one of the top collegiate teams, often referred to as the Kings of Collegiate. They've won CLO multiple times, and they have a deep player pool. They actually have enough for 2 teams, and they're doing tryouts after playing with the same roster through most of fall, which is really interesting. So they have technically 2 players in every role they could use. In top lane, there's PCL and Spyrax. There's in the jungle, Iconic and Odd Orange, and Yuji. Sorry, Iconic and Yuji and Odd Orange. So
Yep.
3 in the jungle role. Mid lane, there's Get Back and Kachu. Yes, Kachu is on the Maryville roster technically. I don't know if he's in for NACL or not. AD role, there's Scary Jerry, and I believe Azog is still in Maryville. And for support, there's Zyko, and I don't know if Shady is still part
It's
of
still
the roster.
Shady. He's still,
Shady's
at least
still
according to the wiki.
Okay, so I believe the assumed roster initially, based on what they were playing, was Spyrex top lane, role swap to top lane, Iconic, Get Back, Scary Jerry, and Zyko. But now they're talking about roster swaps, and roster changes, and I'm really curious about what sort of changes they make, because this roster already feels really, really strong. So I'm curious about your thoughts about if they want to make changes, what sort of changes would you see from this current assumed roster we have right now?
You want to go first, Kelsey?
Sure. Well, I think mid jungle is a place that they can play with for sure. I think Zyko is probably, for my money, the most solid player they have on their team.
Okay.
I think I would look at jungle mid because I think on their bench they have better players than their starters. That is my opinion. So I assume there's a lot to be said for the synergy that the team has, the pre-existing synergy, and the way that those players work together. But that would be what I would look for and what I think could be the best change. If they're doing tryouts, though, who knows? I don't know. They could sign someone completely random, but
I
those are
believe
the
they're
two players I
internal
would look at.
tryouts, right?
Yeah. So it'd be between all the players they have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would look at UG for jungle and then Kachu for mid based on the tryouts that are
Interesting.
happening.
So
Yeah.
do you think it's the synergy between Yuji and Kachu that you value over Get Back and Iconic, or
No. I'm
just
saying
individually?
they
Okay.
probably value the synergy of their existing roster. I am saying that the individual talents of those players would be very interesting to see start for some NACL games. So
Yeah, I 100% agree with Kelsey, and that makes me feel very smart. So thank you, Kelsey. I think I think you can. I think jungle mid are the focus here. There's been like little whispers about, technically Maryville aren't bound by the CLOL rules for their NACL team. So they could like run Niles or somebody, even though he's
There you go.
graduated. I don't think that's happening. I don't think Clerky would do that. I think he would. I assume he has some kind of like compass about this, where he wants the Maryville roster to be the Maryville roster. So I doubt they would do it, but it's a funny thing to imagine. I think the
also
roles to
just
look at are. Sorry, what was that, Kelsey?
I was gonna say also just the practice is not worth it.
Yes.
And just I had the discussion with him and how much emphasis they want to put on the college versus the NACL, though I do know that the NACL does make money for them. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah. But no, I completely agree with the rest of the takes. I don't think their backup bot lanes are NACL level. I would expect them to start Spyrax in the top lane as well. I think the jungles where they have the most depth, my understanding is Odd Orange is on graduation's door. They just picked up Yuji, and I think he's the best of the three by a solid margin. I'm a big Kachu fan, so it's cool to hear that that you believe in him as well. I would think that the kind of concern around him would be he's a bit of a melee mid specialist. I would say. So they may have some concerns there, especially depending on meta. Whereas I think Get Back is a little bit more of an all-rounder, but I am also I think he was a weak point for them last summer, and I think the whole team wasn't great last summer. I mean, they were 1 or 2 games out of relegation, and you could argue those 2 games were the wins they got over AoE when AoE had a sub in Acadian. So definitely a bit of a rough spot for them. And yeah, I mean, I have them power ranked 10th, and so did when I did power rankings on my other show yesterday. We had them unanimously 10th. So I would look to make those Yuji Kachu changes to try to give yourself a little more upside.
Yeah, I think the counter argument where you could see someone like Odd Orange stepping in or something like that is because Yuji famously doesn't talk, and Kachu also doesn't really talk much, and most teams are just petrified of having silent mid-jungle duos, and yes, it is difficult for sure. Like Kachu, for me, he's the kind of player that I love, right? He's the kind of player that I would always want on my team, and that is players who have like really high ceiling, but they int a lot. And by that, I just mean it's like they never see a fight they don't want to take, right? And those are the players I think improve very quickly because they're constantly putting themselves in situations where they have to outplay and they have to think more actively. And I think that those players are really fun. And he also has like he usually puts himself like if he'll take every fight, he'll get himself out of the low probability fights more often than a lot of players will. So that's why I really like Kachu, and I hope that he ends up being on an NACL team by the end of the year. So.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out if that's like Stockholm syndrome from the solo queue games, Kelsey, that you like a player.
I get the logic, right? I mean, you want the guy who hits high elo even making bad decisions, right?
I mean, you think about all the players who are really, really famous for just being superstars, and those are the players that have the int reputations, right?
True.
Everyone hated Caps in solo queue. This guy would go like 0-12 or whatever. JoJo was very similar in NACL or Academy as it was then, right? It's like there's all those memes where it's like if you don't love him at his 0-20, then you don't deserve him at his, like there was one series I remember in 2021 because I was working with the team at the time where he went like 12-0 one game and then 0-21 or something the next game. It was really absurd because it was best of 2. So it's like those types of players are I think the players who always have really high ceiling, who always perform well, and those are the ones that are just like really fun to work with, even if they, for most coaches, are players that just it's like, oh my gosh, why are you doing this to me again, right? So I think that those, like Kachu has that type of an approach to the game. I won't necessarily say it's like the same kind of ceiling as the players I mentioned, but it's very exciting to see a player like that for me. So.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think for me, one of the biggest reasons why that Maryville roster is interesting is because, first of all, the rumors that came about, like Gordo mentioned, those rumors that maybe Nows would play, probably not given Lurky and how they do things. But I also heard rumors that maybe Spyrax was moving back mid, and that was what was prompting the tryouts.
Sure.
Again, somewhat doubt it, especially if Nows is not stepping in. I don't think I've seen Maryville play PCL anytime recently. But to me, Maryville could be 10th. I feel like if they bring in Yuji and Kachu, not because they're bad by any means. I think we've already said mechanically they are great, but it's more that to me Maryville has been a roster that has thrived on being able to cooperate well, and they play together as a team. Might not always feel that way, but usually when somebody's inting, the rest of the team knows how to maximize on the other side because they're kind of expecting the int to come through. Now you put into new players, especially mid jungle, who control the middle of the map and might not have that synergy and that practice because they've not played them through fall. Through fall, it's been Iconic and Get Back. There's a learning curve, and NACL is just going to be a trial by fire for them. So it feels not just for them, actually, for the entire team if they do that. So I'm very curious to see I'm very curious about why they even would do the tryout now rather than doing it earlier and then getting some experience in the belt for the NACL. So yeah, depending on how this roster pans out, they could fluctuate in where I think they're gonna, or how I think they're gonna perform in this one.
Yeah. I will say, just because at least I personally have done quite a bit of hating on Maryville between over the course of this podcast, that a cool thing about Maryville, right, is their mid lane scouting's cracked. Like, they have found so many great mid laners at this point. Found is a strong word, because guys like APA were already very much on the radar. But if Kachu starts in NACL, he will be the 4th Maryville mid to start in the NACL since its inception a year ago. That's crazy, right? Like, get back APA, Spyrax, and now Kachu would be. I think that's a big accomplishment. They would deserve props for that.
Yes, but also I think if your collegiate program is known for being
they attract the best players for sure.
You will get players, right, who want to go there. So there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg there, especially with players like, I think, Spyrax and APA who are known beforehand. So yeah.
Fair.
And if anything, it's even stronger now that Maryville is the only collegiate team in NACL, right?
In
so
NACL.
You want to double dip.
Until Winthrop's getting in here in summer, y'all. Like, get ready for Winthrop. I'll tell you that right now.
That'll be a podcast at the end of the season.
Let's see.
I'm just gonna say it right now on episode 1. Winthrop is getting into this league in a couple months.
I just don't know how Denethor didn't get a team either. It's so crazy, but it is whatever.
I choose to believe it's because he wants to stay with Winthrop. I don't know that, but I know Mobility hopped on an ACL post-match interview last split and offered up the whole team to any NACL org that wanted him. And I don't know if that was an all or nothing kind of deal, but it kind of sounded like it was.
Denethor was actively kind of exploring, so I think.
Oof. In which case, oof. But
I will say,
top lane is stacked. So.
Yeah, top lane is a very difficult role right now, just because there are so many top laners
just across the board. Like, is there any top laner here you trade off for Denethor?
I mean, I would be down to see him over. Maybe over Philip Dragoon, or even like Spyrax. Yeah, Spyrax is a good one.
Oh, but Spyrax is Maryville, so on this.
Yeah, I know. Quacker, not really an option, but
I would see him over Quacker. There are a lot that I would be interested in seeing.
I love Quacker, but I understand. Denethor is so good.
Yeah. I would even maybe say over Zamudo, but we'll see. I think Zamudo's rate of improvement is better than I gave him credit for. But we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, like, on the subject of top lane that you're trying to get it to, RMC, is like top lane in NA right now is just absolutely insane. And it's gonna make things really tough coming into the next season, right? Like next off season. Like, how do you? Because it's like, I feel so bad for guys like Surdy, who I rate as like one of the top amateur or NACL, whatever you want to call it, top laners right now. And the fact that he not only has to like be the best in this league, but he's like shadow boxing like the after image of Licorice and Revenge, who are sitting there free agents not playing. I think it's going to be really tough for guys like him to try to make a breakthrough, especially with only 8 teams in the LCS. But I think like the top lane pool in general is just so strong. Like, you think about, I think all these players are really good. I think Denethor is probably the best player outside of the NACL in North America right now. Fully agree on that. Bradley's off grinding in Korea. Like, Bradley's still around. He's still an NA talent as well. There's so many good top laners around right now. It's a very competitive environment to try to find a spot.
I just find it so funny too, because like I remember this was the issue I think 2 years ago where mid was saturated in North America amateurs, so we had mid laners swap into top lane to kind
saturated is a strong word. It's more like North American mid laners couldn't get a spot in Academy.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, T3 was saturated, shall we say? So people were swapping up to different roles, right? That's why Bradley's in the top lane. He used to be a mid laner, and same with Spyrax, right? He just last split. He was a mid laner, so it does feel like a really tough situation for a lot of these top laners right now. But Kelsey, you named the name of the top lane, which I'm surprised you picked Denethor over. Philip, Cincinnati Fear. Philip is
Why is that surprising?
Because
I'm a Philip fan.
If you're here when we were discussing this actually before the podcast, and I was saying that I don't have a strong impression of Philip. But this guy's played for a while. He's played in the LCS. And I just still don't have an impression of him. But he can't be that bad if he played LCS, right? He didn't do poorly in the LCS.
I think Philip works very well with most teammates. He's a very chill dude, very enthusiastic about certain things, but I don't have a strong, like, were you surprised or did you agree? I guess is the question. Because
I don't have much of an impression of Philip, so I can't.
yeah.
To me, I was just kind of like queuing it up.
I mean, I'm definitely not a big fan of Philip overall in terms of his trajectory and upward mobility. I think that there's a lot more talented top laners in NACL at the moment. Obviously, if he does great, then he proves me wrong. But at the moment, I would say he's probably I guess Spyrax could be the weakest because we haven't seen any tape on him. But other than
I have in collegiate side, but
I would say like Quacker and Philip are probably the weakest top laners in NACL at the moment. So yeah.
I'm kind of surprised to hear that. I get the Quacker point. Like I think Quacker's a little feast or famine up there, and I think Fearless Draft hurts Quacker a bit if you can't just play Olaf every time it's up.
Olaf and Darius every time.
I think that's going to be a little rough for him. But I was pretty impressed with what Philip was able to do after the Cincinnati Fear FlyQuest swap last split. What really comes to my mind is like winners finals against DSG. Like that, I think people forget because DSG reverse swept it, but for I think like 2.5 games there, I think Philip was really running top lane. I think there's a world where they don't throw in mid in game number 3 in that series, and Fear just 3-0s DSG, and Philip is series MVP, and I think then the narrative is a lot different. But
I mean, I think Fear is a team that like their parts together worked very well, right? That is
Fair.
my feeling about Fear. Whereas most of the individuals on Fear are not extremely standout. They were a team that had a good amount of synergy on stage, at least. Depending on who you ask, that wasn't always true off stage, but on stage they had a very good amount of synergy, and they just seemed to work really well. And it's one of those teams that is very kind of some of their parts. So that was sort of my read on the last Fear roster. But I think it'll be very interesting to see how Philip does. But Philip has played for a while. If he improves this year, then he'll prove me wrong. But he's definitely someone who's kind of always mid-tier at best in the secondary league, in my opinion, from top lane position. And so I would like to see, it's a situation where it would be nice to see them try out additional players. But I also get they brought up Toasty. Maybe they don't want to like rookie solo lanes. But
in theory, yeah. I mean, and in theory, Daption's a rookie too. Like,
but I think that this is definitely one of those situations where I can see why they might not want to do it, because there's a big aversion to starting rookies this split in general. So I think that that's one thing that Fear could be thinking about. But in general, I would have liked to see a player like Denethor get a shot. So
okay. So I know you mentioned that since last splits, Fear roster seemed to work together so well. What do you think about this roster? I know that you're saying that there's a lot of strong individual pieces, but like, do you think that's going to be enough when you look across the other teams as well? Because I look at this Fear roster and I like it on paper. I like Toasty, I like Lens, but I don't know if I think this roster is going to be able to pop off necessarily with this level of competition.
So I think Chad's a very interesting player, because Chad is, again, one of those players who like he has like one style of play kind of, and he gives direction to the team in that way, right? Like he will always kind of move fast pace, make decisions quickly, and they will work well around that style of play. And sometimes that is like, you look at some of the best LPL teams in the world, and they just always play one way, you know? Sometimes that's all it takes to take you very far. And as long as this team kind of works around that, I think it's fine. The biggest concern for me is they're probably going to play Moser on bot. I think, as much as I think Toasty Alex has really, really good upside, he needs to work a lot on his laning. And Philip's laning is very questionable at times. Like one of my favorite anecdotes was just a Diamond interview where he's like, "Yeah, it's a 0-10 Philip game," But it was usually a joke. Like sometimes in scrims he just goes 0-10. It's like, oh, and then it happened in a Sage game once. He's like, oh, it's just a Philip game, like one of those like a scrim Philip came out. So I think that Philip's laning struggles, Socialex's laning struggles. So they're gonna kind of ride or die by bot lane. This isn't. I won't say that there's like the most insane crop of laners in NACL bot lane either. So it could be an angle where this is what they excel at. This is how they work. But it's just I can see how this team will play. Also, Toasty Alex very vocal in side landing and setting those up, especially for a rookie. So I'm expecting to see like pretty decent things out of this Sphere roster in terms of like overall construction. Is it the most exciting roster on paper? Maybe not, but I do think it's intelligent in terms of like how it was put together. Makes sense in terms of the pieces available, and has an identity. So I think that this roster could still be a Fear team that punches above its weight, right? So
Okay. Yeah,
that's
because
fair.
I'm concerned about the Chad Toasty synergy. Because as you mentioned, Chad, bit of a Chad in jungle. He likes his aggression early, but Toasty, I'm worried that he's going to suffer for it. I feel like either it's going to work really well where Chad carries Toasty through the early game and he gets to pop off in the mid to late game when he starts fighting, or it goes the other way and Toasty can't enable Chad to play the way Chad wants to play, and everything just kind of falls apart. And that's why I'm kind of a little bit scared with this roster, even though like individually I like the names, but together I've some concerns.
Yeah, I think that's. Oh, go ahead, Kelsey, please.
It depends. I don't really think of Chad as like an invading guy all the time. Like sometimes he'll do a cheese or something like that, but it really depends on what he's playing. It's more like the direction and the clear like plans that he gives.
Mm-hmm.
I will say they did want to play together, like Chad and Toasty. So they probably like play together a lot in off season. Talk about the game together more naturally. So I think it might be a synergy that works out just from sheer force of will. So who knows?
That's fair. I love that you brought up the bot lane and the crop of bot lane in NACL. I think that's a great jumping off point. First of all, for Fear, just because I think Lens is actually kind of well positioned as one of the bot lanes that has some NACL experience coming into this split, because the bot lane crop in NACL this year is like wide. Like the title of best bot lane in NACL is wide open, because if you think about where we were in summer, who are the best bot lane carries in summer 2023 NACL? I think a lot of people would say in some order, Meech, Masu, King, Arrow, and they're all gone. None of them are in the league this split. So I think that there's also so many rookies in the position as well, between like Rock Boom and Sajed and Scooped. I think any of them could kind of make a big step up here. None of them have played in NACL before.
Yep.
But I think my pick as like a team that I'm really watching, and my pick for bot lane to really step up is AOE with Wixie. I'm really excited to see Wixie back. I've been a Wixie fan for a while. I think his grind in Korea in the summer paid off pretty nicely. He had a great run in ACL with a team called the Peach Cats, where he was kind of playing with like the wild card core. He was playing with Keel, and Moose Hater was on that team as well. He had Isles as his bot lane support, who's now an LCS. I think that team really excites me. I think from top to bottom, like I think Zamudo and Onat are both relatively fresh and have some really solid upside. I think Rosethorn's been a great like enabling jungler historically, and Breezy is also somebody I've come up on recently. I think his laning with AOE with Lynx was actually quite good. If you even look at like not to look at stats too hard without context, but if you look at their laning stats, I think Lynx and Breezy were actually quite good in the bot lane, at least in the early stages, on an AOE team that was, I think, overall kind of struggling last year. So I'm excited for this team from top to bottom. I think I have them power ranked 5th, and I think if they break into like top 4, that would be awesome, because I think it's going to immediately like get all these guys' names on people's radar, and I think they all have the potential to kind of make that jump.
Yeah, and 2021, Breezy and Wixie were a duo in the bot lane for C9 Amateur at the time. So they have previous time together, and they looked good as a bot lane as well. So I'm very excited to see them kind of reunited here on this roster.
They are another duo that wanted to play together. They were kind of exploring teams as two.
Mhm.
So they'll probably be playing a lot. I would say that Wixie's laning hasn't been the greatest historically. Obviously, he spent a lot of time in Korea, uh, trying to improve. I assume he's made strides to improve that. Breezy is someone who I think his stocks will go up because I think Enchanter Sports will be very good, and that's like kind of some of his best plus Rakan. Um, like his Rakan Leona and then his Enchanters I think are what he plays the most. The historically, so I think that's something that can do very well. I think Breezy and Rosethorn as a duo is kind of an underrated option. I think because they played on CLG Academy together, and so Rosethorn being like a good top side was something that I think is appealing for AoE, especially with like the Zamudo Onat combo, who um, they're not like super green, but they're a little bit newer to NACL. So I think that's something that it's like another roster that kind of makes sense together. But yeah, I mean, I think that they're exciting, but I also, and they've made like some intelligent choices. So I think that AoE is a team I can get behind, especially for the like kind of spend with the roster construction that they went for. So yeah.
I feel like I feel like the naysayer here because I keep bringing up things like I'm concerned about these rosters. Because for AOE, I'm looking at Zamudo and Onat as newer players. I'm wondering what happens to this roster if they fall behind. Like if they're ahead, I can definitely see them just
I mean,
smashing through. But Zamudo has not impressed me when he falls behind in lane. I have seen him. He likes his carries. That's understandable. I like his carries, but when his carries don't do well, he tends to not do well as well. And
mhm.
Onat, I don't really remember what happens to Onat when he's behind. But I don't feel like he's a carry that sneaks in from behind to sort of turn the tides a little bit. So if they fall behind against some of these rosters, I don't know if I have confidence in them
Onat was my most improved player for summer
for sure.
of NACL, and I think seeing him on like kind of a leveled up roster is really great.
Mhm.
I'm not concerned about Onat. I'm more concerned about Zamudo. Like if you give me someone to be concerned about, it's probably Zamudo, and then
Yep.
Wixie second.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that would be like where I would look. I think Onat is someone who will continue to improve. Like did well in tryouts and off season,
Mhm.
improved a lot in summer. Has very good work ethic. Is a player who can kind of has like one of the qualities that's kind of underrated is just does the player understand how to pressure or how to direct the team with their lead. And I think that some players kind of have the confidence to do it right away, and I think he does. So that's one thing that I'll look at there. So I'm interested in kind of like Rosethorn, Onat, Breezy being like the main core of the roster, and then seeing how Zamudo and Wixie complement it. So yeah.
Yeah. The
Okay.
other thing I'd
Yeah.
say about Onat is the trajectory for Onat is pretty crazy, and that's what gets me really
Yes.
excited for 2024. Because if you think about, like, Onat was around in 2022 playing on like wildcard dev teams and stuff, and I
Yep.
remember, he was kind of forgettable to me at the time. Didn't really
Rip for
stand out to
t-shirt,
me at the
man.
time. I know their coaches believe different. Like when I would talk to wildcard dev coaches and stuff, they were pretty high on him, but I didn't see it too much in 2022. Then in 2023 spring, I think he just like he rocketed up as like the most. I would say he's the most improved player in 2023 spring. Um, in amateur when he ended up qualifying with that first Supernova team. And then, as Kelsey just said, I think he improved a lot in summer 2023 as well. So I mean, if he keeps that up, he's going to be really, really good, really, really fast. Um,
For sure.
so I'm very glad to hear that he retired for like a month and then found out he would be able to still play while going to school. So the fact that he's playing is super exciting.
Yeah. Him and Onat and Tosi were probably the most improved for me players,
Yeah.
or two of the most exciting players for me coming to this split. I just feel like in a way Onat's been somewhat overshadowed, or not overshadowed, but it feels like he hasn't. I haven't gotten to see him really be that huge carry for the team because when he was on Supernova, Dragoon was overshadowing everybody on that Supernova roster. Like when they fall behind, Dragoon just runs in with Darius and forces the 1v5 and wins it. And then when he was on that, what's the next roster? He was on the TFT roster. with the Lunacia Soul in the top lane.
Yeah.
That it didn't feel like Onan had a fair shake sometimes in some of those games. You know what I mean?
Agreed.
So
Rosethorn was there too, right? I'm not
yeah,
crazy.
Roswan was on that TFT.
Wait,
roster.
but wait, yes, yeah.
I mean, yeah, the roster was interesting. I think, like, one thing that we can kind of talk about is some of the rosters that came in last split that were very like rookie heavy that got relegated, right? Kind of created this bias against some of the rookie players, and I think that those rosters were just poorly constructed, and so it's not fair to kind of like. Whereas I feel like the extreme reaction this split is okay. Very few rookies whatsoever on our team. Rookies are not safe, right? And I feel like the rookies will lead to relegation. So that's for me one of the big things I notice about these rosters, and one of the big things that I find kind of disappointing because I think there's players in every role except for AD, right, who like are kind of deserving of a spot. And AD is kind of, if you have a passing knowledge of League of Legends, you are a good AD carry scout. Rookies who deserve it. We mentioned like I don't know if Rock Boom, Sajed, those are probably two of the most exciting rookie players. Getting an option to start, and they managed to find a spot. So I think that those are basically where Scooped also is a player who I think didn't get a spot for so long, and like just talking to him, he has almost given up many times. So it's great to see like that being the role where most of the rookies who deserved it got promoted, right? Every other role, there's players that's like, okay, we didn't want to take a risk on them because this is a role that might require more leadership or more like vocal knowledge of the game. And so that's why I think AD managed to have quite a few rookie promotions, and the other roles didn't. So.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned Scoop, and when Gordo first mentioned him as a rookie, I was like, Scoop's not a rookie. Scoop's been around, and then I was like, wait, but not at tier 2.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
yeah.
He kept getting passed over, and it feels weird to me that this is actually his first shake. And speaking of it, should we talk about these rookies and their teams? Because I feel like on one hand, you've got FlyQuest, obviously, which is very hyped up as a very strong roster.
Mhm.
You've got Lit, who is the only roster who didn't change anybody. Rockboom did play for them a little bit last split, right? Like towards the end of it.
Yeah, he came in after he came in for Sajed like before OQ2 playoffs or something.
Okay, yeah, but that wasn't okay. Yeah, and then we have Mirage Alliance, which is one of the most polarizing rosters, at least opinion-wise, I've heard. So, shall we dip a little bit into that? Which roster would you guys like to look at first?
I would like to talk about Sajed for 1 second if we
Okay,
can.
sure. Yeah,
Just
go for
because
it.
I think I just think that there's a series of facts to look at for Sajed that should get
Okay.
like a fan excited. And like on top of the fact that like I've seen him play, I've been impressed with his play when I've gotten to see it before. But it's also like, and maybe Kelsey has some insider knowledge here to either prove me wrong or support me here. Because you look at the rest of the Fly Challengers roster, and what really surprises me is that Fly decides to go for a rookie bot laner here. Sajed's a rookie in a lot of ways. He's pretty new to the comp scene in general. I think only playing in 2023, maybe he played a tiny bit in 2022. And what really surprises me is, I mean, first of all, to have a rookie bot lane at NACL when you have a rookie in LCS, I think is a little surprising. That's usually the kind of circumstances where you would expect to see a veteran behind them in case, worst case scenario, and you need to make some changes. But then also, like, some of the names floating around, like, I've already hyped up Wixie and said that I think he's really good, and he has that 100 Thieves connection. I know Papa Smithy doesn't build the rosters, but Fly Fam was all X100X guys. So I think there's a little influence there one way or another. At least you would think that. And then like King's around too, and most of the rest of this Fly Challengers roster is the Evil Geniuses roster that Kelsey was building. So I'm surprised to not see King in here either. And the fact that those options were theoretically available and they choose to go with Sajed instead, I mean, to me, just says like they must think they got like another Masu here. They must like just think he's really, really good, and they can't avoid putting him on the. Doesn't matter what the scenario is. We need to get this guy on the roster.
So, like on the King point, I think there was like this is something I kind of want to bring up on the mid situation is that you have to pay a certain amount of salary for a green card, or not a green card, a visa, right? So teams are willing to pay for, I guess, roamer and quad, but not necessarily a player like King, which in my opinion is very unfortunate, because obviously think King is great, and is a very talented AD carry. So like if you don't see King in NACL, it is mostly because of that. That is the unfortunate result of the offseason for him. I'm not saying that Fly was considering him. I'm just saying that in general, it wasn't.
No, yeah, that makes sense.
Possible for him to be on
That was the
NACL
one
team.
where that's the weakest part of that argument for me. Is like I don't know what King is doing or why he's not here. So that makes a lot of sense.
So that's like a thing to call out there. The like a lot of the Aussies, like Harry is another example, that you would kind of expect to see, are not going to be there for that reason. The other element is, like you mentioned, the 100 Thieves connection, but 100 Thieves also chose famously to distance themselves from Wixie after a split, right?
True.
That was like the big beef rivalry that was very fun to watch in summer. So I wouldn't expect him to be on like a Papa Smithy connection. The other is the EG connection, right? Because you have both Empire and Andrew Barton, who are helping build rosters for FlyQuest. So you have like the Surdy, Shaden, Chime was a support we scouted for LCS as well. And then you have Sajed, who was part of the EG Combine, and like the standout player AD there. So all of those players, I think, are. It also is a roster to me. It's like, okay, this roster is highway robbery, and Sajed is actually that good. I think Sajed's landing is very questionable, but you have Surdy, who's probably the best lead laner in NACL. So this is a team that will, maybe Tenacity is better. I haven't necessarily seen his landing recently because obviously he took time off. And then like Surdy is probably one of the best laners, just period, in NACL. He has the pre-existing synergy with Shaden. So bot lane is like going to be more playing for saving them in team fights, for playing the team fights for them, right? So this roster makes a lot of sense to me on paper, the way it is constructed in that way. And yeah, I like Sajed is one of the most exciting new players in the league. Like Sajed and Toasty to me are the two most exciting new players. I think Rockboom's also very exciting. Scoop's also very exciting, but like those are the ones that I look at. I'm just like, okay, I'm very glad that they're in the league. So yeah.
You on the Kisno hype? I hear a lot of Kisno hype.
Kisno is good. I think Kisno has turned a lot of heads in solo queue. He's another player who I think has improved.
Really high in champs queue.
Yeah. Sorry, not solo queue, champs queue. Yeah, but I liked him in solo queue, and he's also one of those players who improved very quickly in new queues over time. Like I think people saw him in the qualifier. People who only watched the qualifier were like, okay, Kisno's almost so losing this, but I actually think like if you look at him individually, especially in like the off-season tournaments, right? I think he's performed well. He had like decent tape in solo queue, and then in champs queue, he's really been turning heads. So I think he is a player I'm excited about too, but I'm a little bit more excited about like Sajed and Tosi just based on like some of the things that I've seen them do over time. Like you mentioned Onat being like very quickly improving. Toshi is someone who, like you talked about their amateur performances a couple years ago. I know Toasty had some hype, but I was not excited about him. But every time I see him, he's just like almost twice as good as he was the last time, right? And that's like for me, APA is probably a player that people will think about in that same category where it's like, okay, the last time I saw him, this guy was terrible, right? And now he's better, and now he's better, and now he's better, like every time you look. So I think that's a reason to be excited about them. Kisno, I think, has improved pretty quickly over a short period of time, but I just haven't seen him over the same prolonged period of time as Toasty, for example. So yeah.
And he doesn't have that prolonged period of time either.
No, he doesn't.
Kisno's another guy that just came up and his first OQ was 2023. Played on some no-name team, was like CB Gaming or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then replaced Hyper on Supernova, qualified for NACL. got dropped, qualified again with Lit, and now here we are. I mean, it's only been 2 splits.
I hope Lit does well because I am happy that they kind of kept their team, right? So
Yeah,
I think
they're
that
like
we should encourage that more, right? So Lit to me as a team, I'm really excited about because of that, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, they're like the qualifier dream, right? Like, you know,
yeah.
the idea with having relegations is that, you know, a group of 5 guys who've never played at this level before can come together and make it in. You know, no offense, Mirage Alliance, but like the 4 former LCS players, I don't know if that's so much the dream as it is for Lit to come in and, you know, have all these new guys get their names in there when teams may have overlooked them in scouting.
And the Sajed Rockboom rivalry is like very cool, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be just very fun. I'm like Rox is a player that I was a little bit disappointed isn't getting an NACL shake. The support player.
Rox 908.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that like overall seeing like the both lit 80s basically is very fun. So yeah.
Yeah, and I love the fact that, you know, Lit qualified, and Dragoon as well. This is his second time qualifying. Dragoon qualifies and then doesn't get to play in an ACL. You know, this is not the first time that's happened. So him finally getting here feels really cool. To me, Lit is my dark horse team. Like on paper, a lot of people are kind of skeptical because it's almost like a full amateur team coming up. So people are just like, they won't perform well. But I think Lit's going to turn a couple of heads. I think Lit's going to win games that are going to surprise people. And I'm looking at that and really hoping that they get to kind of pop off. But okay, so we covered FlyQuest Lit. Let's talk a bit about Mirage Lions as well, because that was the other AD carry who's newer to the NACL and then surrounded by a whole bunch of like former LCS players. So despite that, though, I've heard people like this is the most polarizing team. People are like, some people are they're going to do great. They've got Dardoch, you know, back in the jungle. They've got RJS coming back in the mid lane. And then I got people who are just like, nah, they're washed. And, personally, like I don't have a good read. Alarm's broken my heart a few times. He's told me he's retiring like twice now. He didn't retire. He never retires. But I don't know if this team has it in them to win the NACL.
Sure. I mean, I think this is definitely the example of the team where they're betting on experience to carry them, right? For the most part. I think that like Dardoch Prismal will be a jungle support duo that work really well together. I know Prismal really wanted to play AD again, but he's like willing to kind of take one for the team and make sure that they have like a good jungle support synergy and can really like make plays together. But it could either go like really well or really terribly, but they will be on the same page, right? That's like I could definitely just see the team and how they will play together. I know that they tried out a bunch of different iterations of the roster, a bunch of different options. I think it's a team that's just in terms of viewership, it's a very exciting team, right? Because you kind of don't know how they're gonna do. But I can also just see like the how this roster came together. It's like the very kind of gut reaction experienced roster that made it through. I know a lot of people are going to be disappointed about Sudsy because he's like the opposite of the lit dream, right? Qualifying and then not making it into the league.
Twice in a row now.
Yep. So yeah, I think that's a little like those types of things are it's like Dardoch, Alarim, Prismal, RJS are going to be players that people say, okay, we've seen these players before, right? We know that they're not necessarily going to hit the high highs, but I mean this team with good jungle support synergy, I think that could make up for a lot, right? That could make up for a lot of failures as long as the strong personalities all work together, because there are a lot of strong personalities on the team and Scoop's just like kind of vibing, you know? So
isn't that an 80 carry dream? Just gonna sit back and just puke.
Yeah, I mean,
just chill.
Just watch like just 4 very, very strong personalities, very strong opinions in the room, and then Scoop kind of just going along with whatever happens, right? So that's kind of how I see that team going. It could explode, or it could be one of those teams that does extremely well for the sense of direction that they have coming together. So yeah.
I just find it super interesting that this is the roster with the most experience. And I know, Kelsey, you've mentioned a couple of times that there's a bit of a bias against rookies
Yeah.
in NACL this split. And yet the team that we think, okay, maybe Gordo, do you think this is a stable team before we continue?
Stable's a strong word, but I do think like I have this team I think higher than consensus at
Okay.
like 6th. Which
Hmm.
it surprises
What
me
was
that that's higher than
consensus? consensus?
But I mean there are some really good I don't know, there's some really good teams in this league. I guess I don't know what consensus is, right? It's not like I pulled the whole community. But my sense is that that's slightly higher than consensus. And assuming that it is, I do think like in the lower ranking, in the like the polarizing opinions you're hearing RMC, I think baked into that is like a lot of fan like rep stuff with Dardoch and RJS. Like, you know, they've been polarizing figures on Twitter and in Dardoch's case everywhere for a lot of their career. I don't really buy into that stuff. I think
Yeah.
Dardoch especially has like grown up a lot since those times, since the times that people think about Breaking Point and stuff like that. Mirage was in both splits of ACL, so I watched a lot of Mirage and talked to a lot of Mirage players and like post game stuff. My impression at least is that Alorum and Dardoch really like playing together. I think those two vibe a lot from their time last split. So I don't have concerns there. So I have some degree of hope that like between Alorum, Dardoch, and Prismal, you're gonna have like a lot of adults in the room, and I think RJS should be in that category too. Of he's been at the center of some Twitter drama, sure, but like RJS is not like old school Dardoch level like detonate a team player. Like he's played out every split that he's entered on every team. You know, he played in Korea and made it through that split. He played on CLG Academy for a bunch of splits. Like I think they're getting a bit of a bad rap from like Twitter vibes more so than they deserve. And so like I do kind of I think so. I kind of don't buy into in the sense that I don't buy into I think the narrative that this team they're all just going to collapse.
So I think there's a difference between thinking that they're going to detonate a team because they're going to be toxic or whatever, and thinking that they all have strong personalities and they won't figure out how to play together. I think that's
totally fair.
That second one is very likely to happen, especially when you have experienced players who really want to prove themselves. Sometimes compromises are harder, right? So there's a lot of work there from that perspective. I think Alorum is someone who's great at compromises, so that's probably why he and Dardoch can work very well together. But I can see there being struggles to get to compromises with, like, I guess, so many cooks in the kitchen, if you will.
Yeah, that's fair.
So that'll be, but that's also why I think like Dardoch and Prismal are great jungle support, because I think that they'll have very similar ideas of what is good and what's bad just from seeing those players play a lot, from like talking to Prismal a lot. So I think that that's going to be, it is something that I can see coming together, but it's also something I can see where there being like too many different ideas to come to a consensus, right? So
yeah. And the thing is, Dardoch's coming off like roll swap into support for a bit, so hopefully that helps as well with his coordination of Prism. I can see that definitely working. But personally, one thing I don't like about this Mirage roster is the fact that Mirage qualified out of amateur with younger players, and then you come up here, and then you swap for like all experienced players. And nothing against the players themselves, I just don't like the idea that you're not mixing some of these veterans with newer players, trying to get that blend, and you're going with a whole bunch of experience instead. And add on to that, I know Kelsey, like I was saying earlier about the whole bias against new rookies. This roster feels like the antithesis of exactly that. So, Kelsey, I'm going to give you a soapbox because I know that you want to talk a little bit about the bias against rookies in general in the NACL. So, pop off.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those things, or I talked about it a little bit before, where because the rosters that had some rookies last split were kind of poorly constructed, there's like with things like NXI support, stuff like that, it just doesn't lend to, teams are just very afraid of, I think the main motivation for a lot of the roster building this split was not being bottom 2 and getting relegated, as opposed to wanting to shoot high, right? And whenever there's stuff like that, you're going to have kind of rosters that are more about not losing than doing well or improving So that's like my biggest concern with talking to GMs, talking to a lot of teams in the offseason about like what their plans were and what they're working on, is there's a lot of, oh, this player's not safe, as opposed to we're aiming for number one, right? So I think that's my biggest fear with the rookies, is just they've been labeled not safe, when I think there are definitely situations where, for example, the wildcard roster, I would have loved to see like risks in either the like more risk taking in either like the AD, the mid, or the mid role. I think Winnie is someone who will always give you strong leadership, so I can see why they would go with Winnie. But seeing like some change in the AD mid or jungle role and seeing like more risk taking there, or top lane even, would have been great to see. And then support is support even. I don't know, like literally any role.
Support is a risk
So,
they're taking, right? Doxson is
yeah,
role
yeah.
swapping from mid to support.
It is, but they're also kind of like going for the SLU kind of pre-established construction or whatever.
That team is SLU plus Quacker. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, they're basically SLU plus Quacker. So I can see why they kind of went for that, but at the same time, it's like they could have taken almost any other risk in a risk in construction in almost any role. In terms of just seeing a team that would maybe, in my opinion, look a little bit more interesting on paper and have like more firepower in specific roles. So that's where I'm a little bit puzzled by a roster like Wildcard. And then, like, for all the naysaying of Mirage, they actually do have an AD who's like should have gotten a chance ages ago, right? So yeah, that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, that's
in defense of those Mirage changes, by the way, just going back to what you said earlier, RMC. I mean, the players they replaced were Chad, who is still in the league, and isn't really a rookie either way. I do agree Sudsy got screwed. I'm pretty sad for Sudsy. And then my understanding is that Neo chose to not play and is still here on the bench. It also wouldn't be a rookie.
He's a sub. He's one of
he's
their
on the sub. That is,
five.
for those curious how hey, aren't there roster consistency rules when you first qualify? How does Mirage have 3 new players? Neo is on the bench. That's how. You have to keep 4 out of 7, so it includes the subs, which I think is kind of silly. So they kept one of their subs from last split, and they kept Neo, and they kept Alorum, and they kept Dardoch, so that's 4 subs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, it's
Zoltate, right? Is the sub they kept? Other than Neo?
That's a little silly. Like,
yeah,
there's a big controversy.
It's goofy. You shouldn't be able to do that. It should be 3 of 5 or something.
Yeah, there's a big complaint, I think, from the Mirage GM that's like, oh, I have to have consistency, but SN can have a brand new roster and stuff like this, but it is what it is. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really unfortunate to hear that the split, the idea behind it was just trying to play safe. I don't. That's
how I feel. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I don't know how these rosters were constructed for the most part, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's some rosters that I'm really hyped about, like FlyQuest, TL, DSG, Supernova. But then there are others where I'm less excited about, like Wildcard, like Mirage Alliance, to a certain extent. So, yeah, I just don't think this is the right way to go about constructing a team. And I'm actually going to laugh insanely hard if the teams that played it safe are the ones that actually get relegated, because I think there's so much good talent to be had, right? And if you just pick talent that's just kind of safe. Part of it's also like, are they hungry for it at this point, right? If your entire idea is don't lose rather than go ahead and win, I believe that will permeate the team as well, even if that's just management's thoughts, because they'll tell the coaches like, hey, we got to win no matter what, right?
And I think there's a long history in NA going back to the last time it was called the Challengers League, which is that experience counts for a lot. And the reason why is because you don't learn the game by playing our solo queue. You just don't. So you do have to have, experience ends up being like large experience differentials at almost every level. And that's why the reputation for playing it safe does exist, and why it ends up actually paying more dividends than kind of taking, than trying to promote talent up. But the problem is that NACL, in whatever form it is, does kind of have to be our development pipeline now. And that's why it is a little unfortunate, because it's going to sort of delay us seeing certain talents in LCS. for even longer, and then we might lose even more promising players than we already have because of that. So
I am
Okay.
thankful at the very least that relegation represents a little bit of a release valve for that. You can get a team like Lit into the league.
mhm.
Um, and I think a lot of the next generation is kind of doing that, right? Like the
Yeah,
Hoarder, Lebo, Levitate, Snow roster, whatever that looks like this split, stuff like that to try to force their way in. I think it's better than certain eras of Academy, right? Like where I think the 10 teams may have
mhm.
failed to really be able to identify um, who the next big up and comers should be.
And that's like you have to kind of be a Lit fan, right? If you
Yeah.
want to see changes, you have to, because the only way that these perceptions change is by seeing rosters like that succeed. So it's like if you want to see NACL be a better developmental platform, then Lit is a great example to look at that and like hope that they succeed. So yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Not that the rosters with players that have more experience can't develop. Like they definitely are still a lot of players who have been around for a bit who you could see still continuing to improve, right? So um absolutely not like one or the other, but I do like roster construction where you have like a little bit of both, right? So like the
Yes.
Yes.
Fears, the like even Mirage, like FlyQuest, teams like that where you have a little bit of a combination of new and old. I think will end up also just creating better balance in terms of ideas and the way that the team plays together, because you won't have like necessarily too many cooks in a kitchen. You'll have players who are really benefiting from having so much experience around them. So yeah.
Okay. We touched on wildcard. They are SLU with Quacker. Do we want to get into that? I think it's pretty straightforward.
I think it's a
That
better team than Quacker had. Well, so, and Kelsey's not a Quacker fan, so I got I don't have a
Okay, you have
kindred
to
spirit here.
explain to me the quacker joy or whatever it is, because I do not I'm not experiencing it currently.
That's fair. I liked what he was able to put together on Supernova. I felt like Supernova last split was really a struggling squad, and I think their best path was music ganking top lane over and over and getting Quacker rolling. Uh, yeah, I think he's a fun player to like actually be able to play through and win games. And I think that's being able to play through your top laner and win games was a strat that teams like TFT were also trying and failing at. So I think the fact that Supernova were able to find success that way and that Quacker could be that kind of reliable player for them was, at least to me, stood out as meaningful. And yeah, I don't know, I'm excited to see how he's going to be able to do on a better team, right? Like he was again, that this stat means literally nothing, but he was the solo kill leader in the NACL last split. Yeah, I think he was able to make some stuff happen at the top lane. And like Wildcard is another team, right, who would try to play through top lane through Zamudo, and you get caught too many times, he wouldn't be able to find the right fights, and they wouldn't be able to do it. So I think
Sure.
Supernova was one of the only teams executing like a top centric strategy last split successfully, and I give a lot of that credit to Quacker. Maybe I should give more of it to like music and stuff, and Robbie Bob being able to play around the map. But I give a lot of the credit to Quacker.
And you know what? That's fair. I think you got to give some credit to Quacker when he is the big carry, but I also feel like Supernova was pigeonholed into doing that, and that
Sure, but
didn't
it
work. They
worked.
got ninth place. Well, did
So I
it?
think, and then it's like, and now I think they have some more options, right? In Dark Wings, I know a lot of people are really hyped on Aaron. I haven't really seen it myself, but I know a lot of people are really hyped on Aaron. I think Dark Wings is at least more dependable as like an Azir magey carry than Robbie Bob was. Um, so I think I'm excited for Quacker on an upgraded team. I don't I'm not predicting him through the roof or anything. I have him like 8th, but Salty Redback just posted they did their community poll. The community has them 10th, which I think is unfair. I think they're a little higher than that.
I think that's the general sentiment right now because the concern is you've got Doxer who's role swapped. You
So
have
yeah.
Quacker who did really well individually on a team that played very heavily towards him. And you're about to switch to Fearless Draft where his Olaf Darius is not going to be as available throughout the best of 3. And unfortunately for this wildcard team, I don't think we're going to see that much resources given to Quacker. And Quacker was great within certain context, but I just worry when I see the other top laners he's up against, right? Like, do I think Quacker can carry up against the likes of a Lauren, against Surdy? even Dragoon. You want to talk about Olaf and Darius? Dragoon was the OG Darius, right? Jenkins, I get worried for this roster. I think that's the general fear for a lot of the community when it comes to this wildcard team. Winnie and Darklings will be fine. They're experienced. And Aaron, I love the guy. He was great in CLOL, but this is again another stacked role he's walking into right now. It's tough for Aaron here.
We'll see. Yeah. I mean, I think it's fair to rank them 10th, but also, you've got Winnie. Winnie is almost never 10th, You gotta, but everyone always doubts Winnie, but he knows how to. He's definitely one of those players who knows how to make a team win around him, right?
True.
And love it or hate it, Winnie will go 0-4 camping bot lane and be level 1 to enemy jungle, but he will make it happen. He will.
He'll still invade, and you won't see it coming because he's level 1, and it works about.
So, but yeah, that's for sure. Like when the perception that we had of Chad earlier, that we were mentioning about Chad, that's more Winnie in my opinion. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes for them. But I look at this roster on paper, and it's like they do look like a 10th place team, but they have the Winnie factor, So you gotta give it to them.
And I just want to shout out Winnie as well, because Winnie looks like a madman in the early game with his relentless aggression, but it literally forces a different paradigm on the junglers, because he will not stop. Normally you kill him, you think you're safe. He's still in your jungle, and junglers have to be aware of that. And it feels like he just brings you to that level, and most junglers don't have the experience to handle this. So yeah, if something's gonna happen on wildcard, I'm looking at Winnie to make some magic happen. So Kelsey, before you came to the channel, I was actually telling Gordo and Leanne, Quad, I've been trying to look for, watching him in Champs Queue and stuff like that, so I could figure out how good he was. I just found out and talked to them, I was looking at the wrong player. There's another Korean in Champs Queue with a very, very similar name.
Yeah.
Yep. I was watching Quid thinking I was watching Quad, so I don't know.
Yeah. Different. I at least understand the logic behind Quad, right? Okay. Quad is someone who does extremely well in Korean solo queue, but has never really been able to translate that to stage. So I get having him as an option and trying to see what you can get out of him with time from that perspective. But not the biggest fan of the pickup. I think there were a lot of you were talking about the experience of ADs, right? They clearly have a lot of faith in Moser. I think that's very deserved. I don't think it's risky to go for a rookie just because Moser is so good and is going to be so good. Jensen, I would want a rookie under Jensen personally, in roster construction. So that's something that's why I'm a bit surprised it's Quad, and that's why I'm a bit critical of that one. But I do prefer the Quad choice to the Roamer choice. Roamer, to me, I've done some VOD watching of him. He's been in the LCK-CL. I think he's very poor. He's been very poor in lane, and his map impact is not very high, in my opinion. I think he's just a really strange choice. And when people ask about players like Roamer and how they ended up here, I know who his agent was. And
he's a good salesman?
Yes. And Roamer was a player he was pushing very hard this offseason. Very hard. To basically anyone who had talked to him. So if you talked to him about another player, he said, "Oh, do you need a mid? I have a great mid for you." So I hate to put it that way, but that's what it feels like happened on TL just based on watching Roamer's tape, and that makes me a little bit sad. So that's where I am. Maybe he'll do great. I always feel like I doubt players who we import and then they end up doing great because our talent pool is not insane. For a great example is Gory. I watched Gory in LPL, and Gory was absolutely abysmal in LPL. And then he was a top 2 mid in LCS this summer. So, you never know. They could just be fine. But
that's interesting.
Go ahead, RMC.
Sorry. You talk about the mid pool not being necessarily the strongest, and very important, because
Yeah.
like we said, the mid pool in the past used to be saturated enough, at least in T3, that we were pushing them to the top lane. So do we think that the mid pool in T2 right now isn't that strong and we have to use imports?
I think the mid pool in LCS is a very interesting problem because the promising mids who should be getting LCS opportunities this year all retired or left. So players like Copy, right, who like under no certain terms he's not coming back, right? Like if you talk about him about direct LCS right now, he won't come back. As far as I'm aware, like maybe he'll change his mind. I'm not going to completely preclude it. So if any LCS streams are listening, just at least ask him anyway. But last time I talked to him, it was just not happening, right?
Mhm.
So like you have these types of situations, and now how do we solve this? One is, do we get an inexperienced rookie and put him in NACL? Do we get an import and hope that they're ready faster to make the LCS, right? Those are the questions. Those are like basically the two options that you have at the moment. And so you see the various takes, and only FlyQuest and TL can kind of afford a visa for an import. Unless you're like a collegiate team, then you can bring people over on a student visa. So that's like a specific situation. But that's where we are, and I feel bad when it's like I know that these players will require a certain amount of minimum salary to get a visa, to be here, to play on our ping. So your assumption is that these are going to be like two of the highest paid players in all of NACL. Are they worthy of that? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But
I actually checked this right before stream.
Yeah.
They're the only two NACL players on the GCD, so they're the only ones getting enough money to be listed there.
So it's like from that perspective, we should be very critical of like how they do, right?
Mhm.
And again, like when there's a player like King, who no one would pay for a visa for him, right? It's like, okay, Roamer and Quad, they better be really good, They better be LCS ready by summer. That's like the standard that I think you have to look at them with. And that might be, people might say that that's like not fair or that's too critical, but the situation that we are in as a region monetarily, we are not going to get the best up and coming players to come here. So you have to think strategically about either what import you're importing, what upside you see in them that you think other people won't see, or you have to like aggressively try to coach and promote a player from amateur. And those are the options that you have. And it looks like both Fly and TL have chosen the former. And you have a couple of teams choosing the latter, but overall it's just very okay, we're gonna see what we get out of Darkwings again. but who knows, who knows.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I guess I could see, like, I would be happy if Maryville started Kachu instead of Get Back, even though I think Get Back and Iconic would be the better duo for this split. Because I agree with you. I think the cost, we need to see more rookies. And I don't understand this cost calculation they're doing for importing these international players as well, if they're having to pay so much more for them. Because I'm assuming their pay is going to be like 2, 3, 4 times more than what you're paying, an amateur player
Toasty. Yeah.
in North America.
Easily.
Yeah, they come up through, right? So that means you could afford 4 failures, 4 mid laners who don't pan out versus 1 import mid laner who doesn't pan out. And I don't know, maybe I'm with you, Kelsey, a little bit. I feel like if you're importing at the academy level, they have to perform right away, pretty much, or within the split. If not, it's just, I'll just consider that failure at that point, because giving them more than a year would cost so much more. And aren't we an esports winter? I thought teams were like cutting down salary, leaving the scene, stuff like that. Can you afford to be doing this compared to just growing our own talent?
And my biggest pet peeve on this is when people say, "Oh, don't import. Like you should start an NA player." If you can't name a name, don't say that. But I feel like you can actually name names like Kachu, Samakin,
like players I can name names. Right? Give me that challenge all day.
So that's what I mean. Like you, if you can actually name the name, then be critical, right? And this is a situation where we can for sure name names. So I think that it's, for me, it's a big question mark, especially since I know a little bit of the Roamer situation. So I guess we'll see how it ends up panning out for them.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is we need better agents here in North America who can sell our
Hang on,
amateur
I've
talent.
been
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like,
Sure.
shout out to that guy, because I know his MO. I've known him for years and years and years. This guy has been representing Korean players coming to NA and EU for almost a decade. This guy has been hustling. He always gets
Business has been
someone
booming
in
for the
there.
last few years. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
He always gets someone in there that you would really not expect. You could be of the opinion, and I think this is fair, that some of the amateur NA mids are also risks, but weigh those against the salaries you're going to pay, the feeling that maybe you don't understand how. Like, one thing that's really underrated also is, and maybe TL has a good environment because they have so much infrastructure of Korean speakers, but you don't necessarily understand how a player is going to do in the environment being transported to an A, right? Like, there's a lot of factors that are very risky here, and I don't really understand. Like, if you can see a player and you can see the upside to this player, then you can maybe guess, like, okay, this was why. But with Romer, it's difficult. But again, like, Gory was a player I didn't expect to do well at LCS, and he did amazingly. So who knows? Maybe my opinion is shit. So it's, I don't know. I'm just very skeptical of these, like, two import decisions in particular.
Mhm.
But we'll see. In answer to your question, though, about the Korean bias or the anti-NA bias, I would say in particular it is a bias against the familiar, right? Because you can even go to almost any NA player and say, oh, we're going to give you, we'll just say, like, we'll give you Dark Wings or Toasty Alex or RJS or any of these mids as a teammate. They're going to say, oh, I hate playing with him in solo queue. He always ints, or this guy's opinion bothers me, or his Discord group is weird, because they all know each other, right? And there's going to be, you're going to know the strengths and weaknesses, and particularly the weaknesses of these players that are suggested to you by your GM. But if your GM says, or we have this Korean mid, you don't have to know anything about them. Most
Korean
players
mid could be
will,
anything.
yeah, literally. And most players will just think Faker or whatever upside player that they want, like Faker, Chovy. It's like, oh, we're gonna bring Chovy. Okay, cool, I'm down. Just because it's not the familiar, right? So the grass is it's kind of a grass is always greener syndrome, but this has happened for years, where it's been way easier to build a roster with a quote unquote Korean player that you're just gonna bring without any specification. Even when you're talking to domestic players, historically, it's always been way easier than trying to get this group of 5 players who all know each other to agree to work together. That's just how it's been for a very long time. And it's also easier from a roster building perspective, because there will be so many players like a Roamer or a Quad who know that they aren't going to get an offer to play for a tier 2 or tier 1 domestically for a decent amount of money, and you could pay them also less too, right? You could say, we'll give you like LCS or a CAD minimum or California minimum, and they'll be down, right? So it's a bias of convenience, I would say, is what has existed, because you also just, the reductive model is Koreans are winning, Koreans must be good. So I wish it were more nuanced than that, but it is quite simple.
I fully agree with that. I think it's part. You mentioned scouting as well, Gordo, but I think any scouting is the issue. It's not so much that Korean scouting is better. I think any scouting has failed horrifically, and we saw that in
Yeah,
the
sure.
academy system, right?
Mhm.
Back when it was academy,
I-
the best players aren't always picked up. They pick up whoever seems to be most connected, whoever's the best agents. Hey, Kelsey, you said you're currently unemployed. You know, amateur. You know a lot of people. Maybe you should be an agent for the amateur players, because I think with the new NACL system now, at least now you can see the NA talent actually competing at this level. It's no longer protected and just who you can get. So part of me wants to see the same part of me that wanted to see, you know, the older players, the rosters with less rookies struggle a little bit. I also want to see these like Romer and Quad. You know, I kind of want to see the NA mids be able to beat them, because I want to see North American talent pipeline develop properly. And I'm hoping that happens. It takes a lot of pressure off the NA scouts at that point, because look, if you are lazy, if you don't want to put in the work to try and figure out who's a good mid, because it's not like ADC. You don't just pull up a spreadsheet, see who has the highest DPM at 15 minutes and 25 minutes. You actually got to see how these guys play and how they interact. Well, guess what? Now you can directly compare them within a league, NACL. So fingers crossed, hopefully that helps to develop the LCS as a whole now that we have this sort of external competition and not just a protected market.
Yeah. I will say at the very least, in TL's case, I appreciate that Roamer is in NACL and is not just replacing APA at LCS. Like, it feels like there's been seasons where that could have been what happened, and they're giving APA his shot. I do feel like the implication is kind of that Roamer's breathing down his neck. Like, if Roamer starts playing really well in NACL and APA struggles in LCS, that swap will happen. But it feels like there's definitely a universe where APA got kicked to the curb or back down to NACL, and random Korean import of the day ended up starting on TL. I am thankful that didn't happen.
Very much.
I'm also I'm not necessarily rooting against these players, because if they do really well, that also means that our scouting system has gotten better, right? It means that maybe they actually did see something that I didn't see, right?
Mhm.
So I'd be fine if they do extremely well as well. I'm not actively rooting against any player at ACL. Just to clarify, I am rooting for certain players, but I'm not actively rooting against any player in ACL, and I'm happy if they do well. So
yes, for legal reasons, none of us are rooting negatively for anybody. We are just cheering for any talent.
I mean, I just also like watching players play well.
Yeah, no,
it's fine.
And I said the same thing about MNS as well, right? Like, I do have, despite my rooting for NA talent and my dislike for what I consider to be over importing, I do think like there is definitely a lot more positive to be said about a player coming to our tier 2 system, proving themselves up against the best upcoming NA players, being the best, and then going to LCS. Like, I think I have a lot of respect for that. And I think that carries a lot more weight to me than just giving a free pass to than Quid, right? Than just saying, oh, you played in tier 2 LCK, come right into our major league here mid-season. Good luck. Like, I think I prefer the MNS path far more to the Quid path. And I think the fact that Roamer is being set up to take the former is good compared to the latter.
MNS, I think there's no excuse for it. Yes, he performed well in LCS for the time that he was here, but I also think that for all the things that happened with MNS, the writing was just on the wall, and it took like 5 minutes to literally talk to anyone and to know like the situation. And C9 were like, nah, I can fix him, It's just one of those situations that I just am really mind blown by it. So who knows?
Well, but at least they gave MNS time before they decided they could fix him, even though they were completely wrong.
At least it was NACL first, right? And I think at least if he had been blowing stuff up day one, I don't think he would have gotten the LCS shot. And having that test, I think is a good sign. I would much prefer, if we've got to start recruiting 1 million LCKCL players, I would rather they play NACL first and prove that they are better than the equip. Like, I would prefer that Roamer prove that he be better, and Quad as well, prove that they're better than Young, prove that they're better than Toasty, prove that they're better than NA mid of your choice before they just get a free pass up to LCS, as Young goes the way of copy and never gets an opportunity.
Well, hopefully that doesn't happen. So let's move away from the imports for now and go back to North America, because you mentioned Young, and that's one of the last two teams you haven't talked about. Disguised Gaming, of course. This guy's coming in, sweeping in, and great brand actually building for himself. I think he's been doing some of the best branding here in the NACL. Yeah. And the roster they have as well, there's a lot of hype around this roster. I know that TL, FlyQuest, their names have been thrown around as 2 top teams potentially, but they are LCS teams. That's somewhat expected. DSG, though, isn't. So, thoughts on this roster?
I I think this is a good example of like kind of what Kelsey was talking about earlier, at least in regards to like the rookie aversion. Not that it's bad. I love the roster. I think they're going to be very competitively good. Um, I think it's interesting though that it's like, you know, they're not going to take rookies on a team like this. Like the SG is kind of like, you know, his mission here is not necessarily to find the next LCS player. It's to build the best roster he can and, you know, have games that he can watch on
Mhm.
stream and that his viewers can watch. And I think this roster is very well equipped for that. I think Tenacity and Perry are an incredibly marketable duo. You know,
Mhm.
Tenacity's already a big streaming guy. Perry's a big streaming guy. He's on Twitch all the time as well. Um, so I think the NACL fan base has fallen in love with Young a little bit as well. So I think this will be a very fun team to watch. I think they'll be very good. I'm a little worried about the bot lane. I don't know that Manui can go toe to toe in like later game marksman play with some of the best marksmen in this league. Um, but all in all, I mean, I think it's a top 3 roster easy.
So this is a roster whose construction I don't like. So I actually don't have the top
Okay.
3.
Really?
I
Wow.
think there's an angle where Tenacity just like hard carries the entire team. That could happen. I think Boom's very good. But I think this is a really good example of what I said earlier, which is like fear were greater than the sum of their parts.
Mhm.
I don't really see the angle where Perry and Manui work that well with Young. I think that Fear was a team that worked very well getting through, like working with specific kind of strategies that everyone kind of fit with. Whereas DSU is a team that scaled the play for late game, had really good team fighting. I don't think Manui's team fighting is that great. I think that Young's team fighting is good. He has like no real laning. Perry sort of plays around certain conditions and sets up plans well. And that's not necessarily something that Young, I think, will succeed like super well doing. Um, there's an angle where like Tenacity ends up being like very forceful in terms of like how they want to play around top, things like this. So I'm very skeptical about this roster kind of like functioning as a cohesive unit, right? And I think that the individual skill level of some of the players on the team are also not quite there to brute force it. So that's why it's like for all of DSG's resources, and they probably in this league could have any player they want, right? I'm not the biggest fan of what they came up with, and it's like to me very underwhelming. So that's why I'm not excited about DSG, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, that is actually a really interesting opinion, Kelsey, and I'm glad
Mhm.
that you raised it because, yeah, most people I've spoken to, they think DSG is a top 3 team. I'm surprised you said that you don't think they have the mechanical skill to brute force it.
No, I don't think they do.
Because I think Young's really good, and I think Young mechanically, like you said, his laning was bad. I thought his laning was fine. And I actually
Really?
thought that him and Perry would be fine together as well. Okay, so what about his laning?
I mean,
Like
did you watched an ACL, right? Like he wasn't an
I missed
exceptional
summer, to be
laner.
fair. So I only watched
Uh,
some games in summer, so it might be that.
yeah. I mean, he wasn't exceptionally good at laning. I think he
Mhm,
looked very well in the finals because Ryoma wasn't laning that well.
mhm,
But they were the team that like scaled for late game every time.
right.
Like they played the Azir Jenks strategy, and then he was not really like Young has never really pressured advantages or trades in lane.
Okay.
And that's not how he plays. That's also just like not necessarily within his personality.
Mhm,
Um, whereas like Minui is kind of forceful, Tenacity is kind of forceful, so it's like you're gonna have. I feel like you're gonna have top and bot like both kind of demanding plays around them as well. Um, and then Young is not a player who kind of like roams and helps spread the resources. And so there's not like an inherent duo synergy there. I think Shochi and Perry worked very well together as a unit. Like if you watch their games, they played very well together as two. Even with like the limitations they had on some of their champion pool and things like this.
mhm.
So I don't see Perry and Young having like the same kind of synergy and success. And I think that you're going to have two sides of the map that are going to be difficult to balance in terms of how they play together. So
Right.
And then even Minui's pool was very weird. I mean, the way it was phrased
I
was
thought
like
you liked
Minui not
Minui
being
as a
able
player.
to go toe to toe with other bot
I agree.
lanes.
His
Is
pool's
like,
weird. I'll give you that much.
True.
it almost feels like he's relying on specific picks to kind of set people off balance
Mhm.
more than his individual skills. So we'll see how that plays out in Fearless Draft.
That's fair. Yeah, I think with Gordo, I was a little bit concerned about the bot lane because
Mhm.
Minui to me, as you mentioned, off picks and usually likes to win lane that way. But later on, the team fighting against AD carries of this style in Caliber and NACL, I had some questions. For Young, I agree that I don't think he was lane dominant necessarily, but I did think he worked well with Tomio, or at least what I saw. And granted,
Say he was
yeah,
stable. Like I don't think he lost lane very often, but I
no,
would agree that he doesn't really push advantages
yeah,
as
but I
hard
thought he
as
moved well with Tomio, and because of that, I was thinking if you have side lanes that want a lot of resources, Young's not a bad pick to maybe like help facilitate Perry a little bit, especially if Perry's a bit more proactive. Um, and I do think Young's mechanical skill mid to late is really strong too. So even if he's not ahead in lane, even if he falls behind, he will still have a lot of impact and he will still scale up. So, yeah, I think the raw star potential on this roster is what made me want to believe in it because I think they have a lot of really strong pieces. And even Minui's the concern for team fighting, but I think with season 14 viewing a lot more early game focused, if Minui can maybe win the lane early, especially with the help of Perry, and maybe if Young roams down, then I could see this roster working out.
I think Young will follow Perry, but Young will
Yeah.
not they will not be able to balance the map together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean,
If there's dual demands.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, so,
And
to give
the
credit
reason
to
why
Manu. Oh, sorry. Please finish.
and the reason why Young worked well with Tomio was Tomio does the like you just follow Tomio and Tomio will win a lot of the skirmishes for you. Whereas like that's not Perry's strength, in my opinion. Perry's strength is like he might not be the highest mechanical player, but he like really has like clear comms, sets of
Mhm.
plans, understands the niche in his champ pool, and so he'll need like Young to handle his mid laner to help him a lot more with the playmaking. And I don't think Young is like Young kind of follows a lot more than Young initiates. So
Yep,
yeah,
I'd agree with that. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I
I would
I
also
think Perry's
say
good.
about Manui, to be fair to him, I think he shocked everyone last year. I think a lot of people had him like 16th best bot laner coming into spring.
he's a very
I think
dedicated
people
guy.
really did, like people were really low on Manui coming into
That's
last
not
year,
fair to
and I
him.
think he proved all of them wrong. I think he
Yeah.
like was substantially better than 16th. That's substantially better than 10th.
That barman.
It's a
He
low
was
bar.
better than
It's a low bar.
16th
I'm just
guy.
saying he proved everyone wrong last year, and I think he deserves like a little. And now we're gonna come in again, and we're all gonna say like we don't think he has what it takes to be able to play at this level is no longer the NACL. This level is now like to being like a top 4, like a really high up like high ranking team. But I'm just saying, but people have said like, oh, there's no way Manui can play at this level before, and he's proved them wrong there. So I mean, I think you got to have that in the back of your mind a little bit. Even though obviously I'm not in that camp. I think he's the weak point on this team for sure.
For the record, I'm not doubting you, Minui, in lane. We'll see about team fights later.
And Minui
Okay.
is a very dedicated player in terms of
Mhm.
like his drive and what he puts into it. And like he's another one of those players who's like sure his way is correct. So it'll be very interesting to see Tenacity and Minui together. I think that'll be very funny. So
Uh,
we'll see
yeah,
how it
that should be
goes.
good.
I know. I mean,
Okay,
in fairness, like Tenacity just played with Double Lift, so good times. So,
true, but I
yeah.
think Double Lift was probably a louder voice than. Actually, I don't know if he was a louder voice than Minui. That will be interesting though. Certainly more veteran voice. Okay, the last roster, and as we mentioned, we here on the Interstellar Radio are partnered with Supernova. So last but not certainly least, please pay me money. It is going to be Supernova's roster here, and honestly, I'm pretty excited for this roster as well. We mentioned Sochi being a good mid laner who's perhaps better able to push his advantages. Well, this is the team he's on, and I'm super excited for the AD carry. I love Array. I think Array is one of the best team fighting AD carries in amateur, has been for quite a long time. So glad to see him on this roster. I think this is a roster that can get Array to the team fighting stage and then let him pop off.
Yeah, I like the team all around. I mean, people forget that like Kenvi, how dominant Kenvi was at this level. before he got promoted up to LCS. I think people also forget how regularly dominant Diamond is when he's at this level, despite never really being able to convert it over to the LCS level. Um, yeah, big fan of Array as well. I'm a Shochi fan.
Yeah.
I like what Shochi has shown us on Cincinnati Fear. I think he was probably top 2, top 3 mid in NACL summer, especially if you like. I feel like the Harry APA thing is cheating, right? Like they were like both LCS guys, so I don't put either of them in the running. But yeah, I think Shochi was really, really good in the NACL in summer. I hope to see him build on that. And I think Faisal like let me down, I think, a little bit in summer. I expected to see him take like a big step up given a big platform and a really powerful team in FlyQuest Challengers. And I think they kind of fell short of the really high potential that team had. I don't think it was exclusively Faisal's fault, but yeah, he's the one I'm a little bit lower on just because he didn't have that big breakout performance I expected from him in summer, but that doesn't mean it can never happen. And I think the rest of the squad is certainly very strong and could enable something like that.
So I think that Faisal has the highest upside. Yeah, but I think this team is interesting because it's like the opposite of DSG, like player to player, except for supports. I think Faisal is like the chill guy who will just play what you tell him to play. It's like, oh yeah, I can pick Olaf here. I can pick Gragas here. I can pick whatever, Kenvi is a very mechanically gifted player, but he doesn't like talk as much. And I think that was a difficulty for him at the LCS stage, was just confidence and direction in terms of him being able to develop those things. And then Shochi is a player who is very talkative, very like good for vibes, very and also like more kind of lane playmaking focused, and less like good in fights. And then Array will scale, play team fights. And like Diamond, I think, and Poom will serve similar functions. Diamond might be more lane focused than Poom. So I think it's interesting to see this, but like given those opposites, I think Supernova feels a bit more holistic and together. It's gonna kind of be like Kenvi and Array are the carries, and Shoji Diamond kind of dictate the direction, and Faisal like is down for whatever. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this team plays. It's very fun because I know Diamond will like really kind of push his AD to improve laning. So I'm interested to see if Array can develop that, because Array's personality is like much more like Young's, very quiet, doesn't necessarily look for the trade angles as much. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes with Diamond, because Diamond will be the kind of person who just pushes him, right? So I'm curious to see how that will work out.
Yeah, and if it really does happen, then I feel like Array might be the next sort of LCS AD carry, because I feel like his mid to late's already there. It's just his laning that it's not terrible, but it's also not a strength of his.
I think he's in the running there as well. For like I said, the top bot lane in the NACL is wide open. He's another one of the names that I think is at the top of the list for who could really claim that title firmly and get himself in the running for an LCS spot sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
that is. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say as well, the Supernova point. This team as well, one thing I really like about it is I feel it is one of the teams that's really built with sort of a synergy in mind. Like I said, it's built to get Array to the team fight stage and then let him actually team fight. I feel like a lot of these rosters have big names, and then we have questions about how does this team function sometimes, right? Like there are teams where we go, okay, we know how they function, but it doesn't feel like they were built to necessarily function a certain way. They were just like, okay, this is what they're most likely going to fall into as comfort or with the way the players mesh. But I do feel like the Supernova roster actually feels like it. There's a very clear idea. You've got the weak side, king top side, Faisal can play whatever. So they do have a secondary carry option. You've got Shochi can be a very strong sort of early game mid jungle duo that can control the map. And that just creates the space and the time for Array to really come online. So this is a team where I feel like this was our goal. This is how we want to play. Pick the players to roll for it.
Completely agree there. Well, that's all 10 teams. We kind of said we weren't going to do all 10 teams, and then we did all 10
whatever.
teams.
Yeah.
So we bumped up the recording time on
Did we
this one a
really
little
talk
bit. We'll
about
see.
TL, or did we just talk about Rover?
We kind of just talked about Rover. If we want to do
Yeah.
a quick run through on TL,
Okay, yeah, let's
I
go
do.
through,
I,
pull it
I
out.
I do love Keel. Keel especially was
Yeah.
number 2 in MVP voting last split. I was very surprised to not see him move up. Although I guess no junglers really moved up other than Pseudo Tomio. So it's a little disappointed for him, but I think
So
he's
was
going to be
mine.
fantastic. I think the rest of the team is going to be very good as well. I think Jenkins, I'm really happy to see him back. I was really impressed with his play on CLG Challengers. I think he really stepped it up in spring before his team disbanded. And I think Kim Down also has really stood out to me over the course of the last year. I was really down on Kim Down when he came into the league, and yet he, I think, surpassed those expectations. And then even recently in ACL, he came into sub for Isles after Isles got his LCS bid and was no longer allowed to play in our league. And he really impressed me there as well. I think he even looked like Wixie Kim Down looked like a better bot lane than Wixie Isles, which is, that's exciting stuff given that Isles is getting that LCS bid. So Spawn, I think my stocks are lower on after summer, but he was on a rough team. So I am interested to see how he recovers. I feel like it seemed to me like he's been a very confidence-driven player. Like when he's been on a team that can get ahead, and when he's been with like a really experienced support, like the Diamonds of the world, or who's he with before, JJ. When he got his first promotion on Dignitas, like the Diamonds and the JJs of the world, I think he's been very good with. And then when he moved up to LCS and was one of the weaker bot lanes, I think he really kind of crumbled. And then you saw similar stuff to that when he was with NXI in summer. So I'll be very interested to see him with Kim Down. And I think with a team this strong pound for pound, we could see a big resurgence from Spawn.
I just don't know who's going to carry on this roster. I'm going to be real.
Yeah.
I have no idea. They're all kind of just
Kill and Spawn, right? Like
they all just kind of like create space. That's been their role in previous teams, is creating space for everyone else. So I'm very curious to see who will carry, because that's like, also shout out to Jenkins. He's basically the TL franchise player. I will not hear any other words to the contrary. Eventually he'll be in LCS for them, like just
Again,
TL franchise
he's been in
player,
LCS for them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but not intentionally. We'll put it that way. But yeah,
He will be one day. Yeah, my problem with this roster has a lot to do with Jenkins, Romer, and Kim Down. Like, I think Q and Spawn are really solid. I'm not worried about them. So if you're asking who's going to be carry, Q can carry. He as a person can carry. I don't know if the meta would allow him to carry right now.
His Belveth is good. I hear Belveth is going to be good this year.
Yeah. With the jungle changes,
You get one game of Belveth until Fearless takes it away from you.
This is how Belveth carries. Invade level 1. Kill the enemy jungler. Carry. Don't kill the enemy jungler. The game is lost. So we'll see. It's not really like Belveth and Keel being able to carry on Belveth. It's just like the nature of the champ. Either you win the level 1 or you don't. So we'll see how it goes.
You gotta dominate the early. But yeah, for Jenkins, I don't understand Jenkins. I'm gonna be honest. Like, he feels good as a later. He's got weird picks. Yeah, and then like later, partially it's the team that I saw him on, right? Like on that CLG roster, it was kind of like like the whole team just wasn't clicking. So it's kind of like, okay, I don't know how Jenkins gonna function. Like, I guess he can create space, maybe. Like, he should be able to do that without too much communications. So for me, Jenkins is a player I'm trying to get a feel for, and hopefully I'll be able to understand or have a more concrete feeling about him after this split. And as for Kim Down, yeah, he's popped off recently, but Kim Down to me is a very mechanical player. He has his ups and his downs. And when I've seen him in competitive play in the past, like, his laning's fine, and then sometimes his sort of macro gets a bit questionable as a support. So I want to see if he can maintain this form he had during the off season, because off season's nice and all, but it's really what happens during NACL that matters. So I think he has the ceiling to be here, but I think his floor might be lower than quite a few of these other supports. So I want to see whether he can maintain that skill level, whether that's his new level, or whether it's just a bit of a spike we're seeing in the off season.
I also want to say I think the support competition this split is quite high. So I think it'll be more challenging for Kim Down. So we'll see how it goes.
Do you think across the board, or you think there's like some very good players? Like, because when I look at it, I'm seeing like 2 tiers, I guess. Supports.
They're clear tiers, but I think like having players like Poom, Chime, Diamond's still playing, like Breezy's still quite good. Like these types of situations, I think it becomes. I even kind of rate Zyko, so like these types of situations, I think it'd be. I don't know what form Prismal will be in, but I mean Prismal's like very feast or famine. So I think it will be interesting because I wasn't like people were very very high on Kim Down by the end of NACL summer, but I didn't see a lot of the appeal. So it'll be very interesting to see how he looks against some of the like kind of XLCS competition that trickled down.
Well, with that, we have gone through all 10 teams, this time in full. So this has been a huge, lengthy episode number 1, but I've had a ton of fun talking about this. Thanks so much for joining us, Kelsey. It was awesome to pick your brain on so many of these players and teams and the scene in general. Do you want to give last word to you? Is there anybody you want to shout out? Anything you want to say? Any resumes you want to drop in here? See how the upcoming season's gonna go?
No resumes. I just like obviously it's kind of our self-appointed job on this podcast to assess and call out these players. But I also like when it comes to NACL, I always want to err on the side of like positive and encouraging, because if any of these players do well, I think it's just good for the scene, right?
Yep.
So I don't want like DSG to fail. I hope they do well. I don't want like these teams to crash and burn, or these players to crash and burn. And if all of them end up like improving exponentially, we have an incredibly competitive league. It's great. So shout out to the players, because within the past year, they've all had to take significant salary cuts to continue to compete in this league. And they're all doing it for the passion. So that's like super cool to me. Like I hope they all do well just for that. So yeah, like shout out to them. That's my calling there. Also, I will be co-streaming NACL. I'm excited about that. So we can hang out if you guys wanna jump into the chat during the days that it happens.
Awesome, exciting stuff there. Well, thank you everybody at home who tuned on in, especially for an episode that I'm sure is going to be pretty up there in length. It's been great talking to you. We're going to be back weekly. I don't know, maybe weekly, hopefully weekly, with NACL episodes throughout this season. We're going to have some more awesome guests. And yeah, it's going to be a great season. Happy to have you all along for the ride. That'll do it for the episode. So until next time, thank you guys for watching again. We'll see you next time.